The blizzard that swallowed Cheyenne Station on December 23rd, 1887, should have killed Clara Monroe. Frozen to a bench with nothing but a medical bag and the scandal that destroyed her career, she was ready to die alone until hoofbeats cut through the howling wind. What happened next became the most legendary love story in Wyoming history. Stay with me until the end of this incredible tale and comment below which city you're watching from. I'd love to know how far Clara and Daniel's story has traveled. The wind screamed like a wounded animal through the empty platform of Cheyenne Station, driving needles of ice into every exposed surface. Clara Monroe pulled her threadbare coat tighter, though it offered no more protection than tissue paper against the Wyoming winter's fury. Her fingers, once steady enough to perform delicate surgeries, had turned blue beneath her worn gloves. She couldn't feel them anymore, couldn't feel much of anything except the bone-deep cold that promised a slow, quiet death. The last train had departed 3 hours ago, its black smoke long since swallowed by the white void that had descended upon the frontier town. The station master had locked up and fled to wherever warm people went on nights like this, leaving Clara alone with her shame, her medical bag, and the 23 cents that wouldn't buy her shelter anywhere in this unforgiving place. "Should have stayed in Boston," she whispered through cracked lips, though the words were immediately stolen by the wind. But Boston held only disgrace. Now a career destroyed by a powerful man's wounded pride, her reputation shredded in every hospital from Massachusetts to New York. Dr. Harrison Blackwood had made certain of that after she dared to contradict his diagnosis in front of the hospital board, saving a child's life, but sealing her own professional death warrant. The bench beneath her had accumulated enough snow that she appeared to be sitting on a white throne, a frozen queen of nothing, ruler of emptiness. Her eyelids grew heavy, and she knew what that meant. The cold wasn't painful anymore. It had become almost warm, almost welcoming. This was how people died in blizzards, not screaming, but surrendering to the seductive promise of sleep. "Just a few minutes," she murmured, letting her eyes close. "Just need to rest for a few minutes." The sound came from nowhere and everywhere at once, hoofbeats steady and strong, impossibly clear through the storm's chaos. Clara forced her eyes open, certain she was hallucinating. Death she'd heard sometimes came dressed as familiar comfort. Perhaps hers would arrive on horseback, like something from the penny novels she'd read as a girl. But the figure that materialized from the white wall of snow was no angel of death. It was a man tall and broad-shouldered, moving with the easy confidence of someone who'd conquered worse storms than this. His long duster coat whipped around him like dark wings, and when he swung down from his horse, a massive black stallion that seemed unbothered by the weather, Clara saw his face clearly in the lamplight that still burned weakly above the platform. Daniel Hayes had the kind of face that belonged on wanted posters or romance novel covers. Sharp cheekbones, a strong jaw shadowed with stubble, and eyes the color of whiskey held up to firelight. Those eyes swept the empty platform once before landing on Clara, and something in them shifted from casual observation to acute concern. "Ma'am?" His voice was deep, roughened by years of shouting over cattle drives and Wyoming wind. "Ma'am, can you hear me?" Clara tried to respond, but her voice emerged as little more than a croak. "Train. Missed the train." Daniel covered the distance between them in 3 long strides, his boots crunching through the fresh snow. Up close, she could see the lines around his eyes, lines her mother would have called them, though his expression now held no humor. He pulled off one leather glove and pressed his hand to her forehead, cursing softly at what he found. "How long have you been out here?" 3, maybe 4 hours. Clara's teeth chattered so violently she could barely form words. "The station closed." Jesus Christ. Daniel shrugged out of his heavy coat without hesitation, wrapping it around Clara's shoulders. The residual warmth from his body hit her like a physical force, and she gasped at the sensation. "We need to get you inside, now." "Can't afford," she started, but Daniel was already scooping her into his arms as if she weighed nothing at all. The medical bag fell from her numb fingers, and he paused only long enough to snatch it up before striding toward his horse. "My bag," Clara protested weakly. "Got it," he said shortly, somehow managing to secure both her and the bag while mounting his horse in one fluid motion. He settled her across his lap, pulling her against his chest, and wrapping the coat more securely around them both. Hold on to me. Claire's frozen fingers couldn't have gripped anything if she'd tried, but it didn't matter. Daniel's arm around her waist was like an iron band keeping her secure as he spurred the stallion forward into the storm. She pressed her face against his chest, breathing in the scent of leather and tobacco and something uniquely masculine that made her feel for the first time in months like she might actually survive this night. The Grand Cheyenne Hotel materialized from the blizzard like a glowing sanctuary, its windows casting golden rectangles of light onto the snow-covered street. Daniel didn't bother with the hitching post, simply dismounted with Clara still in his arms, and kicked open the hotel's front door with enough force to send it crashing against the wall. "Hawkins!" he bellowed, his voice filling the elegant lobby. "Get out here!" The hotel manager, a thin man with pomaded hair and a meticulously waxed mustache, appeared from behind the front desk, his expression shifting from annoyance to alarm when he saw Daniel Hayes standing in his lobby, snow swirling around him like he'd brought the storm inside. "Mr. Hayes." "Sir, we weren't expecting your best room," Daniel cut him off. "Now. And get someone to build up the fire. Send up hot water blankets and soup. Move." "Sir, I'm afraid we're quite full for the holidays." Daniel shifted Clara's weight to one arm, reaching into his vest pocket with his free hand to pull out a roll of bills that made Hawkins's eyes widen. "Your best room." He repeated, his tone suggesting this wasn't a negotiation. "Whatever it costs, and if someone needs to be moved, move them." Hawkins nearly tripped over himself in his haste to comply. "Of course, Mr. Hayes. Right away, sir. The presidential suite on the third floor, it has the largest fireplace." Daniel was already moving toward the stairs, taking them two at a time despite Clara's weight in his arms. She drifted in and out of consciousness, aware of movement, of voices, of hands, gentle, despite their strength lowering her onto something soft. A bed, a real bed with clean sheets that smelled of lavender. "No," she mumbled, trying to sit up. "Can't pay." "Stop talking about money," Daniel said firmly, pressing her back down. "Hawkins, where's that hot water?" The next hour passed in a blur of activity. A maid appeared with steaming kettles and thick wool blankets. Daniel himself stoked the fire until it roared, filling the suite with blessed warmth. He pulled off Clara's frozen boots with surprising gentleness, clicking his tongue at the state of them cracked leather and holes that had let the snow in. "How long since you've eaten?" he asked, helping her sit up to sip the beef broth another servant had brought. "Yesterday." Clara admitted, too exhausted to lie. "Maybe the day before. I've been traveling." "From where she... Boston." Daniel's eyebrows rose. "That's a hell of a journey for a woman alone. Family out here." Clara shook her head, then immediately regretted the movement as the room spun. "No family anywhere. I'm a nurse. Was a nurse. I heard there was work in California. Hospitals that might not have heard..." She trailed off, but Daniel's sharp gaze missed nothing. "Heard what?" "Nothing. It doesn't matter." "It matters if it nearly got you killed on my town's train platform." He pulled a chair close to the bed, settling his large frame into it with unexpected grace. "What's your name?" "Clara. Clara Monroe." "Well, Miss Monroe, I'm Daniel Hayes. I own the Double H Ranch about 10 miles north of here. And despite what you might think, finding half-frozen women at train stations isn't how I usually spend my evenings." Despite everything, Clara felt her lips twitch toward a smile. "What were you doing there in this storm?" "Waiting for a shipment that didn't come. Seems the weather had other plans for everyone tonight." He studied her face in the firelight. "You're not just any nurse, are you?" "That medical bag of yours, I saw the instruments when I picked it up. Those are surgeon's tools." Clara's fingers tightened on the mug of broth. "I trained as a surgical nurse at Massachusetts General. I assisted in operations." "Assisted?" Daniel's tone suggested he heard what she wasn't saying. "In my experience, folks don't flee Boston in winter and nearly freeze to death over assisting." "It's a long story. Good thing we've got all night. The storm's not letting up until morning at least." Clara met his gaze, then really looked at him for the first time. He was younger than she'd first thought, maybe 35 to her 28, but his eyes held the weight of someone who'd seen his share of hardship. His hands, she noticed, bore the calluses of hard work despite his obvious wealth. This was no soft Eastern gentleman playing at being a rancher. "Why do you care?" she asked softly. "You don't know me. I could be a criminal for all you know." "Are you—" "No." "Then that's settled." Daniel leaned back in his chair, but his attention never wavered from her face. "As for why I care, let's just say I know something about running from things that weren't your fault, about starting over when the world's turned against you." Something in his voice made Clara's throat tight with unexpected emotion. "Mr. Hayes, Daniel. Daniel." The name felt strange on her tongue, too intimate for strangers. "I appreciate everything you've done truly, but I can't accept charity. As soon as the storm clears, I'll be on my way." "To where, California, with 23 cents in your pocket?" Clara's eyes widened. "How did you—" "Counted it when I was looking for identification in case you didn't wake up. Wanted to know who to notify." He shrugged, unrepentant. "Listen, Miss Monroe. Clara. I didn't pull you out of that storm just to watch you walk back into another one. My ranch needs a medical person. We're 30 miles from the nearest doctor, and he's a drunk half the time. I've got 40 hands working for me, plus their families. Someone's always getting hurt, kicked by horses, gored by bulls, cut by barbed wire. Last month I lost a good man to blood poisoning from a wound that probably could have been treated if we'd known how." "You're offering me a job?" Clara couldn't hide her disbelief. "You don't even know if I'm qualified." "Those instruments in your bag tell me you're qualified. The fact that someone in Boston wanted you gone badly enough to destroy your reputation tells me you're probably too qualified for their comfort." Daniel's smile was sharp as a blade. "I found that the best people are usually the ones somebody's trying to silence." Clara set down the mug with trembling hands. "There was an incident, a child, a senator's daughter. She came in with severe abdominal pain. Dr. Blackwood, the chief surgeon, diagnosed hysteria, wanted to send her home with laudanum." "But you disagreed." "I'd seen those symptoms before. Appendicitis. I tried to speak privately with Dr. Blackwood, but he wouldn't listen. Said I was overstepping, that nurses shouldn't presume to diagnose." Claire's hands clenched in the blankets. "The child was getting worse by the hour, so I went over his head. Spoke directly to the parents, told them to demand another opinion. Let me guess you were right. The surgery saved her life, but Dr. Blackwood, he has connections everywhere. He made sure I'd never work in medicine again on the East Coast. Said I was insubordinate, reckless, that I practiced beyond my scope." Clara's voice turned bitter. "The child's father tried to help, even offered me a position in his household, but the damage was done. No hospital would risk Blackwood's wrath by hiring me." Daniel was quiet for a long moment, then he stood abruptly. "Well, lucky for both of us, this isn't the East Coast. Out here, we care more about results than reputation. The job's yours if you want it, room board and $30 a month." $30? Clara gasped. It was more than she'd made in Boston. "Is that not enough? I can go to 35 bucks." "No, I mean, yes, it's enough, more than enough. But you don't even know if I can do what you need. Can you stitch wounds to—" "Yes." "Set bones, Guy?" "Yes." "Deliver babies, Guy?" "I've assisted in dozens of births." "Then you can do what I need." Daniel moved toward the door, then paused. "Get some rest. I'll send someone for you in the morning once the storm breaks. We'll get you some proper clothes and supplies in town before heading to the ranch." "Daniel, wait." Clara struggled to sit up straighter. "Why are you really doing this? And don't tell me it's just about needing medical help. You could hire any doctor from Denver or even Chicago with the money you're throwing around." He turned back to her, and for a moment his carefully maintained facade cracked. "My wife died 3 years ago. Childbirth. The doctor was drunk, took too long to arrive. By the time he did, she'd lost too much blood. The baby, too." His voice was steady, but Clara heard the pain beneath it. "I swore I'd never let something like that happen on my land again. So yes, I need medical help. But I need someone who gives a damn more than they care about protocol or propriety. Someone who'd risk their career to save a child." The door closed behind him with a soft click, leaving Clara alone with the crackling fire and the weight of unexpected possibility. Outside, the storm continued to rage, but for the first time in months she felt warm. Not just from the fire or the blankets, but from something deeper, the dangerous flame of hope rekindling in her chest. She thought about Daniel Hayes, about the pain he carried behind those whiskey eyes, about the way he'd wrapped his coat around her without hesitation. She thought about 40 ranch hands and their families, about wounds that needed tending and babies that needed delivering. It wasn't the life she'd planned when she'd trained at Massachusetts General, when she dreamed of becoming one of the first female surgeons in America. But maybe that was exactly why it might be the life she needed. Clara settled back against the pillows, her medical bag within arm's reach, a talisman against uncertainty. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, a new world entirely. The frontier didn't care about the scandals of Boston drawing rooms or the wounded pride of pompous doctors. Out here, she realized a person might be judged by what they could do rather than what they were allowed to do. The next morning dawned clear and bitter cold, the storm having blown itself out sometime in the pre-dawn hours. Clara woke to find a complete set of new clothes laid out on the chair where Daniel had sat, practical wool skirts, sturdy boots, a warm coat that would actually protect against Wyoming weather. There was also a note in bold masculine handwriting, "Hawkins will bring breakfast. Be ready by 9 d." She dressed quickly, marveling at how well everything fit. Daniel must have estimated her size with the same precision he probably used to judge cattle weight at auction. The boots were soft leather lined with fleece, and when she stood, she felt steadier than she had in months. Breakfast was an overwhelming affair: eggs, bacon, flapjacks, fresh bread and coffee strong enough to resurrect the dead. Clara ate until her stomach, shrunken from weeks of near starvation, protested. She was finishing her second cup of coffee when Daniel arrived, looking refreshed and vital in a way that made her acutely aware of her own exhaustion. "You look better," he said without preamble. "The color is back in your face." "I feel better. Thank you for the clothes. I'll pay you back." "You'll do no such thing. Consider it a signing bonus." He picked up her medical bag, testing its weight. "We need to stop at Henderson's general store. Make a list of whatever medical supplies you need. Don't be conservative. I'd rather have too much than not enough when someone's bleeding out." The trip to Henderson's was surreal. Daniel introduced her simply as Miss Monroe, the Double H's new medical officer. And if anyone found it strange that the ranch had hired a female nurse, they kept their opinions to themselves. Daniel's presence commanded respect. Clara noticed people stepped aside when he walked, tipped their hats, addressed him as Sir, without prompting. "You're something of a big deal around here," she observed as they loaded boxes of bandages, laudanum, carbolic acid, and surgical silk into his wagon. "I employ half the town one way or another," Daniel said matter-of-factly. "The Double H is the largest ranch in southeastern Wyoming. We run about 8,000 head of cattle, couple hundred horses. During Roundup, I hire extra hands from town. Their wages keep businesses like Henderson's running." "And you built all this yourself?" "Inherited the land from my father, but it was just struggling farmland then. I converted it to cattle, brought in breeding stock from Texas, learned the business from the ground up." He helped her climb onto the wagon seat, his hands lingering perhaps a moment longer than necessary at her waist. "Made my share of mistakes along the way, but that's how you learn." The ride to the ranch took them through landscape that stole Clara's breath. Mountains rose in the distance, their peaks snow-covered and magnificent against the crystal blue sky. The prairie rolled out in all directions, vast and empty, and somehow beautiful in its desolation. She'd never seen so much space, so much sky. It made Boston feel like a cage she'd been living in without realizing it. "It's something, isn't it?" Daniel said, noticing her expression. "First time I saw it, I knew I'd never leave. This land gets into your blood." "It's terrifying," Clara said honestly, "and beautiful, like it could kill you or save you depending on its mood." Daniel gave her a sharp look. "That's exactly what it is. You might survive out here after all, Clara Monroe." The Double H Ranch, when it finally came into view, was far grander than Clara had expected. The main house was a sprawling two-story structure of timber and stone with a wraparound porch and windows that caught the afternoon sun. Barns and outbuildings spread out in organized clusters, and she could see men working with horses in several corrals. Smoke rose from what looked like a bunkhouse, and she could hear the distant sound of hammering from a blacksmith shop. "Welcome to your new home," Daniel said, and something in the way he said it made Clara's heart skip. As they pulled up to the main house, men began emerging from various buildings drawn by curiosity. Clara felt their eyes on her, some skeptical, some curious, a few openly appreciative, before Daniel's glare sent them back to work. "Tom," Daniel called, and a weathered older man approached, his face creased with lines that spoke of decades under the Wyoming sun. "This is Miss Monroe, our new medical officer. She'll be taking the room in the East Wing. Make sure everyone knows she's to be respected and obeyed when it comes to medical matters." Tom tipped his hat to Clara. "Ma'am, welcome to the Double H. Lord knows we need someone with medical sense around here. Just last week, Jimmy tried to treat a knife wound with whiskey and chewing tobacco." "External application, I hope?" Clara asked. "Mostly external," Tom said with a grin that revealed several missing teeth. "The boy ain't too bright, but he means well." Daniel helped Clara down from the wagon, and she found herself standing in the yard of the Double H Ranch, medical bag in hand, surrounded by rough men and endless sky. It should have been terrifying. Instead, it felt like the first real breath she'd taken since that horrible day in Boston when her world had collapsed. "I'll show you to your room," Daniel said. "You can get settled, then I'll give you a tour of the place. Tomorrow you can set up your medical office in the room off the kitchen. It's got good light and plenty of space for supplies." As they walked toward the house, Clara noticed a small cemetery on a hill overlooking the ranch. A lone oak tree stood sentinel over the graves, its bare branches stark against the sky. Daniel followed her gaze, his expression tightening. "That's where Margaret's buried," he said quietly. "My wife, and our son." "I'm sorry." Clara said the words inadequate but necessary. "It was 3 years ago. The pain, it doesn't go away, but you learn to carry it." He looked at her directly. "That's why you're here, Clara, so no one else on this ranch has to learn to carry that kind of pain." The room Daniel showed her to was modest but comfortable, a bed with a thick quilted cover, a washstand, a small desk by the window, and a wardrobe for clothes she didn't yet own. But the window looked out over the endless prairie, and the afternoon sun filled the space with golden light. "It's perfect," she said, meaning it. "Dinner's at 6 in the main hall. The hands eat there too. I don't hold with the owner eating separately from the workers. Fair warning, they're a rough bunch, but they're good men. They'll test you at first, see what you're made of. Don't let them push you around." "I handled Boston society doctors," Clara said wryly. "I think I can manage cowboys." Daniel's laugh was rich and genuine, transforming his face. "You know what I think you can too." He left her to settle in, and Clara sat on the bed, running her hands over the quilt. Someone had made this with care, tiny even stitches creating a pattern of interlocking rings. Wedding rings, she realized with a start. This had probably been Margaret's room, or at least her quilt. A knock at the door interrupted her thoughts. A young Mexican woman entered with an armload of additional clothes. "Senor Hayes, he say you need these?" she said in accented English. "I'm Rosa. I cook and keep house." "Thank you, Rosa. These are too much." "Senor Hayes, he is good man," Rosa said firmly. "He saved my family when we come here with nothing. Now you save his ranch people. Is good trade no—" As Rosa helped her hang the clothes' practical dresses. Riding skirts, even a split skirt for riding astride. Clara learned that the Double H was more than just a ranch. It was a community, a refuge for people who needed second chances. There was Tom, the foreman, who'd been with Daniel's father, Rosa and her husband, Miguel, who'd fled violence in Mexico, Jimmy, the boy Tom had mentioned, who was orphaned and would have starved if Daniel hadn't taken him in. "Senor Hayes, he collect broken people," Rosa said with a knowing smile. "Give them work purpose. Maybe he collect you too, no?" That evening, Clara entered the dining hall with trepidation. 40 pairs of eyes turned to stare at her rough men in rough clothes, their faces burned by sun and wind. The room fell silent except for the scrape of chair legs as they stood hat in hand, a gesture of respect she hadn't expected. Daniel stood at the head of the long table. "Men, this is Miss Monroe. She's our new medical officer. You will treat her with the same respect you'd show me. Any man who doesn't will be looking for new employment before he can spit. Understood." A chorus of "yes, sir" filled the room. "Good. Now sit down and eat before Rosa's food gets cold." The meal was unlike anything Clara had experienced. The men were crude but not cruel. Their conversation peppered with profanity that stopped abruptly whenever they remembered her presence. They talked about horses and cattle, about the coming spring roundup, about a wolf that had been stalking the outer pastures. Miss Monroe. One brave soul ventured a young man with bright red hair and more freckles than face. Is it true you're a real nurse from back east? It's true, Clara confirmed. I trained at Massachusetts General Hospital. Can you really cut people open and fix their insides? This from Jimmy, barely 16 and wide-eyed with fascination. When necessary, yes. A grizzled older cowboy snorted. No offense, ma'am, but you don't look strong enough to hold down a man who's bleeding out. Before Clara could respond, Daniel spoke. Strength isn't always about muscle, Pete. Miss Monroe held off one of Boston's most powerful doctors to save a child's life. I'd say that takes more strength than wrestling cattle. The respect in his voice was unmistakable, and Clara felt warmth bloom in her chest. The men looked at her with new interest, and the conversation shifted to stories of injuries past broken bones. Knife wounds, the time someone got trampled by a bull, and lived to tell about it. After dinner, Daniel walked her back to her room. The night was clear and cold, stars scattered across the sky like spilled diamonds. You did well tonight, he said. They're already half in love with you. They're terrified of you, you mean? That too. His smile was visible in the moonlight. But give it a week. Once you've patched up a few of them, you'll have their loyalty for life. Cowboys are simple that way. We remember who takes care of us. They reached her door and Clara turned to face him. Daniel, can I ask you something? Shoot. What really happened to you? You said you knew about running from things that weren't your fault. What were you running from? His expression shuddered. That's a story for another time. Get some sleep, Clara. Tomorrow you start earning that $30 a month. But as Clara lay in bed that night, listening to the unfamiliar sounds of the ranch horses, nickering coyotes howling in the distance, the creak of the windmill, she thought about the shadows in Daniel's eyes. Everyone here was running from something Rosa had said. Daniel collected broken people. Maybe Clara thought as sleep finally claimed her, they could be broken together. Maybe that was enough. Maybe that was everything. The morning after her arrival dawned cold and clear, with frost painting delicate patterns on Clara's window. She dressed quickly in one of the practical wool dresses Rosa had brought, pinning her hair back in a severe bun that she hoped would make her look more authoritative. Her hands trembled slightly as she fastened her medical bag, not from cold, but from the weight of expectation. Today she would prove herself worthy of Daniel's faith, or she would fail spectacularly. The kitchen was already bustling when she arrived. Rosa commanded her domain with the efficiency of a general directing two younger girls in breakfast preparations while bread baked in the massive iron stove. The room Daniel had designated for her medical office adjoined the kitchen, a practical choice as it would have hot water readily available, and the warmth from the cooking fires would keep medicines from freezing in winter. You eat first, Rosa insisted, pressing a plate of eggs and bacon into Clara's hands. Cannot heal others with empty stomach. Clara had barely taken 3 bites when the door burst open. Tom rushed in, his weathered face tight with concern. Miss Monroe, we need you, now. Jimmy's had an accident in the barn. She grabbed her medical bag and followed Tom at a run, her new boots slipping on patches of ice. A crowd had gathered in the main barn, men stepping aside as she approached. Their faces showed the skepticism she'd expected. Could this slight Eastern woman really help Jimmy lay in the hay, his face white with pain and his left leg bent at an unnatural angle below the knee? One look told Clara everything she needed: a clean break of both the tibia and fibula, with the bones displaced but not thankfully breaking through the skin. Compound fracture, someone muttered. Boy's gonna lose the leg. No, he's not, Clara said firmly, kneeling beside Jimmy. His eyes were wide with terror, and she could see he was going into shock. Jimmy, look at me. You're going to be fine, but I need you to be brave. Can you do that? The boy nodded, tears streaming down his freckled cheeks. Good. Now I need 4 strong men to hold him still, and someone needs to bring me 2 straight boards about 3 feet long, strips of cloth, and a bottle of whiskey from wherever you men hide it. We don't, someone started. I can smell it on half of you from here, Clara said sharply. This isn't the time for pretense. Get it now. The authority in her voice surprised even her, but the men jumped to obey. Daniel appeared in the barn doorway just as Clara was examining the break more closely, his expression unreadable. Pete said the boy fell from the loft. 20 feet at least, Tom confirmed. Landed bad. Clara felt along Jimmy's leg with practiced fingers assessing the damage. The break is clean, but the bones are displaced. I need to set them before the swelling gets worse. She looked up at the gathered men. This is going to hurt him terribly. He may scream, he may pass out, but you must hold him absolutely still or the bones won't align properly. You've done this before, Daniel asked quietly. Dozens of times at Massachusetts General. She met his eyes steadily. I can do this. Then do it. Clara had the men position themselves, one at Jimmy's shoulders, one at his hips, two holding the injured leg above and below the break. She gave Jimmy a leather strap to bite down on and a generous swig of whiskey that made him cough and sputter. On the count of 3, she said, positioning her hands on either side of the break. 1, 2. On 3, she pulled with steady, firm pressure while simultaneously manipulating the bones back into alignment. Jimmy's scream could probably be heard in Cheyenne, but the men held him steady. Clara felt the bones slip back into place with a satisfying alignment that her trained fingers recognized immediately. Perfect, she breathed, then quickly began splinting the leg while Jimmy sobbed into Tom's shoulder. She worked with swift efficiency, patting the leg carefully before securing the boards, wrapping everything tightly but not so tight as to cut off circulation. His toes are pink, Pete observed, sounding surprised. That's good, right? Very good. Clara confirmed, checking Jimmy's pulse at his ankle. The blood flow isn't compromised. With proper care and rest, he'll heal completely. He'll be walking normally in 3 months. 3 months, Jimmy wailed. But spring roundup will happen without you, Daniel said firmly. You'll do exactly as Miss Monroe says, or you'll be looking for work elsewhere. Understood. As the men carefully carried Jimmy to the bunkhouse, Pete lingered behind. He was the one who'd questioned her strength at dinner the night before. Now he pulled off his hat, turning it in his hands. I owe you an apology, ma'am. That was... Well, I've seen Army doctors who couldn't have done what you just did. Were you in the Army, Pete? Cavalry. Saw plenty of field medicine during the Indian Wars. Never saw anyone set bones that smooth that fast. He paused. The boy really won't lose the leg. Not if he follows instructions and keeps weight off it while it heals. I'll check on him every day, watch for infection. Pete nodded slowly. Welcome to the Double H, Miss Monroe. Really welcome. Word of Jimmy's successful treatment spread through the ranch like wildfire. By noon, Clara had a line of men outside her new medical office presenting various ailments they'd been meaning to get looked at. She treated infected cuts, pulled rotten teeth, lanced boils, and diagnosed one case of what was clearly the early stages of consumption, sending the man to town with strict instructions to see the doctor there for confirmation. Daniel appeared in her doorway late in the afternoon, watching as she carefully stitched a deep gash in a cowboy's palm. Miguel says you've seen 15 men today. 17, Clara corrected, tying off the suture with steady hands. Apparently your men have been walking around with untreated injuries for months. Cowboys don't complain about pain. It's considered weakness. It's foolishness, Clara said bluntly. That cut on Sam's hand was starting to fester. Another week and he might have lost the hand entirely to blood poisoning. The cowboy in question, Sam, looked sheepish. Didn't seem worth bothering about, ma'am. Everything is worth bothering about when it comes to your health, Clara told him firmly. I'd rather see you for something minor than have to amputate something major later. After Sam left, Daniel remained in the doorway. You've won them over completely. Tom says the men are already calling you Doc Monroe. I'm not a doctor, Clara said, cleaning her instruments with carbolic acid. Out here, you're whatever we need you to be. He paused. There's something I want to show you. Can you spare an hour? Curious? Clara followed him outside to where 2 horses stood saddled and waiting. One was his black stallion, the other a gentle-looking bay mare. I don't really ride, Clara admitted. In Boston, we had carriages. Time to learn. Out here riding is as essential as breathing. He helped her mount his hands warm and steady at her waist. Don't overthink it. Buttercup here knows what she's doing. Just move with her, not against her. They rode slowly at first, Daniel staying close enough to grab her reins if necessary. but Clara found the rhythm surprisingly natural, and soon they were moving at an easy pace across the prairie. The late afternoon sun painted everything gold, and the mountains in the distance looked like they were made of purple shadows and silver light. "Where are we going?" Clara asked. "You'll see." They created a small rise, and Clara gasped. Below them in a sheltered valley was a small gathering of buildings she hadn't seen from the main ranch. Smoke rose from chimneys, and she could see children playing in the snow, while women hung laundry on lines strung between posts. "What is this?" "This is where the married hands live," Daniel explained. 15 families in total. The women do laundry and mending, for the single men tend vegetable gardens in summer, help with harvest. The children help with chickens and smaller livestock. His expression grew serious. 3 of those women are pregnant. 2 more have young babies. They need you as much as the men do, maybe more. Clara's mind was already cataloging supplies she'd need, procedures she should review. "Do they know I'm here?" "Word's spreading. Maria, that's Tom's wife. She's been asking when she can see you. She's 6 months along, and her last 2 pregnancies ended badly." "I'll see her tomorrow," Clara promised. "Any woman who wants to come." They sat on their horses for a moment, watching the domestic scene below. One of the children spotted them and waved enthusiastically, and Daniel waved back. "You've built something remarkable here," Clara said softly. "It's not just a ranch, is it? It's a whole world." "It's survival," Daniel said simply. "Out here we take care of our own because no one else will. These people trust me to keep them safe, employed, alive. It's a responsibility I don't take lightly." "Is that why you saved me, because you take care of your own?" Daniel turned to look at her, and something in his expression made her heart race. "You weren't mine then. You are now." The weight of those words hung between them as they rode back to the main ranch. Clara tried to tell herself he meant it professionally. She was his employee under his protection. But the way he'd looked at her suggested something deeper, something that made her chest tight with possibility and fear in equal measure. That evening dinner was a livelier affair. The men peppered her with questions about Jimmy's leg, about their own treatments, about medical mysteries they'd always wondered about. Clara found herself relaxing, even laughing at their crude jokes and tall tales. "Doc Monroe," one of the younger hands asked, "is it true that in Boston ladies wear cages under their dresses?" "Crinolines," Clara confirmed with a smile. "And yes, some are quite cage-like, highly impractical for actual movement." "Bet you're glad to be free of all that nonsense," Pete commented. "You have no idea," Clara said fervently, and the men laughed. After dinner, she checked on Jimmy in the bunkhouse. The boy was propped up in bed, his splinted leg elevated on pillows, regaling anyone who'd listen with a dramatic retelling of his accident and treatment. And then Doc Monroe just grabbed my leg and crack, put it right back together like she was snapping kindling. "It wasn't quite that dramatic," Clara said, entering the bunkhouse. The men all stood respectfully, and she waved them back down. "How's the pain, Jimmy?" "Not too bad, ma'am. Tom's been giving me whiskey like you said." "Small amounts," Clara emphasized, looking sternly at Tom. "We don't want to trade a broken leg for a drinking problem." She checked his toes, still pink and warm, and the tightness of the splints. Everything looked good, but she made a mental note to watch for swelling over the next few days. As she prepared to leave, Jimmy caught her sleeve. "Doc Monroe." "Thank you. Pete said I would have lost the leg if you hadn't been here." "You're welcome, Jimmy. But you can thank me by following my instructions exactly. No weight on that leg for at least 6 weeks." Outside the bunkhouse, she found Daniel waiting for her, leaning against a fence post and smoking a cigarillo in the darkness. The end glowed red in the night. "Making rounds already?" "Good medical care doesn't stop at sundown." She pulled her shawl tighter against the cold. "Your men are incredibly loyal to you." "They're loyal to the Double H. There's a difference." "Is there—" Daniel took a long draw on his cigarillo, then ground it out beneath his boot. "My father built this ranch, but he was a hard man. Cruel, some would say. He believed in breaking men like he broke horses with force and fear. When I took over, I swore it would be different. Respect and fair wages buy more loyalty than fear ever could." "What happened to him, your father?" "Died 5 years ago. Heart gave out, the doctor said, but I think it was rage that killed him. He was furious that I'd married Margaret. Against his wishes, she was Mexican, you see. and he had very specific ideas about bloodlines. Daniel's voice was bitter. He died cursing us both, saying the ranch would fail under my soft leadership. But it didn't fail. It thrived. It did. And Margaret was the best thing that ever happened to this place. She started the vegetable gardens, organized the women, taught the children their letters. She made it a community instead of just a business. His voice caught slightly. Losing her nearly broke me. Some days I think it did break me. Without thinking, Clara reached out and touched his arm. You're not broken, Daniel. Wounded maybe, but not broken. Broken things can't build what you've built here. He looked down at her hand on his arm, then up at her face. In the moonlight, his eyes were unreadable. Careful, Clara. I'm not a good man to get close to. I've got too many rough edges, too much darkness. We've all got darkness, Clara said softly. It's what we do with it that matters. For a moment she thought he might kiss her. He leaned closer, his hand coming up to cup her cheek, thumb brushing across her cheekbone. But then a door slammed somewhere, breaking the spell, and he stepped back. You should get some rest. Tomorrow will be busy. It always is. Clara nodded, not trusting her voice. She walked back to the main house alone, her cheek still warm where he'd touched it, her mind spinning with possibilities she shouldn't be considering. She'd been here exactly 2 days, and already the careful walls she'd built around her heart were beginning to crack. The next morning brought new challenges. Maria Tom's wife arrived at Clara's office before breakfast, her face drawn with worry. She was a handsome woman in her 40s, with silver threading through her dark hair and the kind of strength that came from decades of frontier living. Tom says you're a real nurse, she said without preamble, that you know about babies. I do, Clara confirmed, guiding Maria to a chair. Tell me about your previous pregnancies. The story that emerged was heartbreakingly common. 2 successful births in Maria's 20s, then 3 miscarriages in her 30s, and now this unexpected pregnancy at 41. Tom thinks I'm being foolish to worry, Maria said, hands protective over her swollen belly. But something feels different this time. Wrong, maybe. Clara performed a careful examination, palpating Maria's abdomen with gentle hands. The baby was positioned correctly. Heartbeat strong, but Maria was right. Something was off. Her blood pressure was elevated, and there was slight swelling in her ankles that concerned Clara. Have you had headaches? Spots in your vision? Some headaches? Yes, and dizzy spells. But Clara recognized the early signs of what could develop into eclampsia, a condition that killed many women in childbirth. Maria, I need you to rest more. No heavy work feet elevated when you can. And I want to see you every week to monitor your condition. Is the baby in danger? Not if we're careful, but this is serious, Maria. You must follow my instructions exactly. Word of Maria's visit brought other women throughout the day. Clara treated everything from morning sickness to infected wounds from kitchen accidents. She discovered that these frontier women had been relying on folk remedies and prayer for most ailments, with the occasional visit from the drunk doctor in town for emergencies. We lost 2 women last year, one young mother confided. Childbed fever. The doctor said there was nothing to be done, but we wondered. There's always something to be done, Clara said firmly. Cleanliness, proper care, attention to warning signs. We're not going to lose anyone else if I can help it. That afternoon, she was organizing her medical supplies when she heard a commotion outside. Through the window, she saw Daniel and several men riding in hard. One of them slumped over his saddle. She grabbed her bag and ran outside. The injured man was Carlos, one of the Mexican hands. His shirt was soaked with blood from a deep gash across his chest and abdomen. The men were carrying him inside, but Clara stopped them. No, the kitchen table. Rosa, clear everything I need, boiling water, clean cloths, and all the lamps you can find. Move. As the men laid Carlos on the table, Clara could see the wound was worse than she'd initially thought. It ran from his left shoulder across his chest and down to his right hip, a diagonal slash that had miraculously missed the major organs but was bleeding profusely. What happened? She asked, already cutting away his shirt. Mountain cat, Daniel said grimly. Came out of nowhere. Carlos got between it and his horse. Claire's hands moved automatically, pressing cloths against the worst of the bleeding while she assessed the damage. The wound would need extensive stitching, and she could see exposed muscle in several places. I need everyone out except Daniel and Tom, she said. This is going to take time. Can you save him? Rosa asked, her face pale as she looked at her countrymen. Yes, Clara said with more confidence than she felt. But I need space to work. For the next 2 hours, Clara fought to save Carlos's life. She cleaned the wound meticulously, checking for damage to internal organs, then began the painstaking process of stitching the layers of tissue back together. Daniel assisted without being asked, holding edges together as she worked, handing her instruments before she requested them. His calm presence steadied her when her hands began to shake from the tension. You've done this before, she observed as he expertly tied off a suture. Field medicine during missiles during range wars. Nothing this extensive, but enough to be useful. Layer by layer, Clara rebuilt what the mountain cat had torn apart. She worked with a precision that would have impressed the best surgeons at Massachusetts General, her training taking over completely. By the time she tied off the last external suture, the sun was setting and Carlos was breathing steadily under the influence of laudanum. He'll live? Tom asked from the doorway. If infection doesn't set in, yes. The next 48 hours are critical. Clara wiped her bloody hands on a cloth exhaustion, hitting her like a physical blow. He needs to be kept still, the wound cleaned twice daily with carbolic acid. I'll stay with him tonight. You'll do no such thing, Daniel said firmly. Rosa and her daughters can take shifts. You need rest or you'll be no good to anyone. He was right, but Clara insisted on checking Carlos once more before allowing Daniel to walk her back to her room. Her dress was ruined, covered in blood, and her hands shook with delayed reaction to the stress. You saved his life, Daniel said quietly. That wound would have killed him if you hadn't been here. It still might kill him. Infection is always a risk with animal attacks. But he has a chance now. That's more than he would have had. He stopped at her door, studying her face in the lamplight. You were magnificent in there. I've never seen anything like it. I was doing my job. No, Daniel said softly. You were doing much more than that. You were saving one of my people, and Clara, I need to tell you something. Her heart began racing, but before he could continue, Tom appeared at a run. Boss, we've got trouble. Riders coming in hard from the north pasture. Looks like rustlers hit the herd. Daniel's expression hardened immediately. How many head? Maybe 50, 60. But boss, they shot William. He's hurt bad. Clara was already moving. Bring him to the kitchen. Is the table cleared? The next hours blurred together. William's gunshot wound was through his shoulder, shattering the bone. Clara worked to remove fragments, clean the wound, and stabilize the joint as best she could. He'd likely never have full use of the arm again, but he'd live. By the time she finished, it was past midnight. The kitchen looked like a battlefield hospital, and Clara herself was swaying on her feet. Daniel caught her as her knees buckled. That's enough, he said, sweeping her up into his arms. You're done for tonight. She wanted to protest, but exhaustion made speech impossible. Her head fell against his shoulder as he carried her to her room, and she breathed in his scent, leather, and gunpowder, and something uniquely him. The rustlers, she mumbled. Did you catch them? That's tomorrow's problem. Tonight you rest. He laid her gently on her bed, pulling a quilt over her still-dressed form. Clara caught his hand as he turned to leave. Daniel, what were you going to tell me earlier? He was quiet for a long moment, then bent and pressed his lips to her forehead. That you're the best thing that's happened to this ranch since Margaret died. Sleep now, Clara. She was asleep before he closed the door. The next days fell into a pattern. Clara would check on Carlos and William first thing each morning, pleased to see both healing without signs of infection. Then she'd see whoever needed treatment, cowboys, women, children. Word had spread to neighboring ranches, and people began arriving from miles away, seeking the lady doctor at the Double H. Daniel often found reasons to stop by her office bringing coffee or asking medical questions that she suspected he already knew the answers to. Their conversations ranged from medical procedures to literature to philosophy, and Clara found herself looking forward to his visits more than she should. One afternoon, about a week after the rustler attack, Clara was teaching some of the ranch women about preventing childbed fever when Daniel appeared in the doorway with a telegram. His face was grim. Clara, you need to see this. The telegram was brief but devastating. Harrison Blackwood. Heading Wyoming, stop. Claims nurse stole medical supplies, stop. Warrant issued Massachusetts, stop proceeding with extradition. Stop. Clara's hands shook as she read it. He's coming here, but I didn't steal anything. I know, Daniel said calmly, but he's got legal papers and the local sheriff might feel obligated to honor them. I'll have to run again, Clara said, her voice hollow. I can't let you harbor a fugitive. You're not going anywhere, Daniel said firmly. This is my land, my town. Blackwood wants a fight. He'll get one. You don't understand. He has connections everywhere. Judges, politicians. This isn't Boston. Clara, out here we have our own kind of justice. He turned to Tom, who'd been listening from the doorway. Send word to Judge Patterson in Laramie. Tell him we need him here as soon as possible. And Tom, make sure the men know we might have visitors from back east. Unfriendly ones. Tom's grin was wolfish. Been a while since we had to run off claim jumpers. The boys will enjoy the practice. But Clara couldn't share their confidence. That night she sat by Carlos's bedside, checking his bandages and trying not to think about the future she'd begun to imagine here crumbling away. The Mexican cowboy was awake, his dark eyes studying her with unexpected perception. You are afraid, señorita. Yes, she admitted. There was no point lying. This man who comes for you, he is powerful, very powerful, and vindictive. He won't stop until he destroys me completely. Carlos reached out and grasped her hand with surprising strength. You saved my life. William's life, Jimmy's leg. You saved Maria's baby that hasn't even come yet. You think we let some Eastern pendejo take you? He shook his head. You are Double H now. We protect our own. His words echoed Daniel's from that first day, and Clara felt tears prick her eyes. It might not be enough. Then we make it enough. Carlos's expression was fierce despite his weakness. You know what Senor Hayes did for my family when we came here running from men who wanted to kill us for my brother's debts? He stood at the ranch entrance with a rifle and told them they'd have to go through him. 12 men against him alone, and they backed down. You know why? Clara shook her head. Because they knew he meant it. He would die before letting them take us. And Senorita? He looks at you the same way he looked at those men, like he'd burn the world down before letting harm come to you. As if summoned by his name, Daniel appeared in the doorway. How's our patient? Healing well, Clara said gently, extricating her hand from Carlos's grip. The wound is closing cleanly. Good. He looked at Carlos sternly. You should be resting, not gossiping. Not gossip, jefe. Truth. Carlos closed his eyes, a small smile on his lips. The señorita needs to hear truth sometimes. Daniel walked Clara back to the main house, the night air crisp and clear. The stars seemed impossibly bright, and somewhere in the distance coyotes sang to the moon. Are you really prepared to stand against Blackwood? Clara asked. He could destroy your reputation, your business connections. Let him try. Daniel stopped walking, turning to face her fully. Clara, I need you to understand something. This ranch has survived blizzards, droughts, rustlers, and range wars. We've buried good people and bad ones. We've built something worth protecting here. You're part of that now, whether Blackwood likes it or not. But the law says a lot of things. It also says a man can't beat his wife, but Sheriff Morrison looks the other way when Jake Henderson comes home drunk. It says rustling is a hanging offense, but we've never strung up a man for taking cattle to feed his family. The law is what we make it out here, and I'll be damned if I let some Boston bureaucrat use it to take you away. The passion in his voice made Clara's heart race. Daniel, why do you care so much? You barely know me. He was quiet for a long moment, looking up at the stars. When he spoke, his voice was soft. The night Margaret died, I prayed for the first time in my life. Really prayed. I begged God to save her, promised I'd do anything, give anything. But she died anyway, and I stopped believing in much of anything. He looked down at her, his eyes intense in the starlight. Then I found you on that platform, half frozen and ready to give up, and something inside me came alive again. Like maybe God was giving me a second chance to save someone who mattered. And you do matter, Clara, more than you know. Clara couldn't breathe. The space between them seemed charged with electricity, and when Daniel's hand came up to cup her cheek, she leaned into the touch. "I matter to the ranch," she said weakly. "You matter to me," he corrected. "The ranch needed a nurse. He stopped struggling for words. I needed to remember what it felt like to hope for something again. This time, when he leaned toward her, no door slammed. His lips met hers gently at first, then with growing passion as she responded. Clara had been kissed before chaste pecks from Boston suitors, but this was different. This was fire and promise and a hunger that matched her own. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Daniel rested his forehead against hers. "I'm sorry. I shouldn't have—" "Don't you dare apologize," Clara said fiercely. "Not for that. Not ever for that." He smiled, then a real smile that transformed his face. "You're going to be trouble, aren't you? I thought you knew that when you hired me." They walked the rest of the way in comfortable silence, hands brushing but not quite holding. At her door, Daniel paused. "Judge Patterson will be here in 3 days. He's an old friend, owes me several favors. We'll figure out a legal way to keep you here. And if we can't, then we'll figure out an illegal way. Either way, you're not leaving the Double H unless you want to." Clara wanted to argue, to point out all the ways this could go wrong, but the determination in his eyes stopped her. This man who'd built an empire on the Wyoming frontier, who'd faced down rustlers and claim jumpers, and his own father's cruelty, he was willing to risk it all for her. "Thank you," she said simply. "Don't thank me yet. Blackwood hasn't met Wyoming justice. He might wish he'd stayed in Boston." The next 3 days passed in tense preparation. Daniel met with various town officials, calling in favors and making his position clear. The ranch hands went about their work with rifles closer to hand than usual. Clara continued treating patients, trying to maintain normalcy despite the sword hanging over her head. Judge Patterson arrived on a Thursday afternoon, a distinguished man in his 60s with silver hair and sharp eyes that missed nothing. He listened to Clara's story without interruption, occasionally making notes in a leather journal. "Miss Monroe," he said when she finished, "Dr. Blackwood's accusations are serious. He claims you stole medical supplies worth considerable money." "Every instrument in my bag was either a gift from graduating or purchased with my own savings," Clara said firmly. "I have receipts for most of them. And these receipts are where, in Boston, in my former lodgings, which I'm sure Dr. Blackwood has had searched and cleared by now." The judge nodded thoughtfully. "A convenient absence of evidence. Tell me, what exactly did you take?" Clara listed her instruments: scalpels, forceps, suturing needles, a stethoscope. All tools of her trade, nothing that specifically belonged to the hospital. "And in your time here, Miss Monroe, how many lives have you saved with these allegedly stolen instruments?" "4 directly. Carlos, William, Jimmy, and a woman with a breached birth last Tuesday. Dozens more if you count preventing infection and treating injuries before they became fatal." Judge Patterson turned to Daniel. "And you're prepared to vouch for Miss Monroe's character?" "With my life," Daniel said without hesitation. "She's proven herself invaluable to this community. Taking her away would be a crime far worse than any theft of medical supplies." The judge was about to respond when the sound of approaching horses made everyone tense. Through the window, Clara could see a group of riders approaching 6 men in Eastern clothes, looking severely out of place on their rented horses. Leading them was Harrison Blackwood himself. Clara's blood turned to ice as she watched Harrison Blackwood dismount with the stiff movements of a man unaccustomed to horseback riding. Even from a distance, she could see his face was red with exertion and fury, his perfectly tailored coat now dusty from the trail. The men with him looked like Boston lawyers and law enforcement, their city shoes slipping in the ranch mud as they tried to maintain their dignity. "That's him," Clara whispered, her hand unconsciously gripping Daniel's arm. "I see him," Daniel said calmly, though his eyes had gone hard as flint. "Tom, make sure the men are ready, but tell them to hold unless I give the signal." Judge Patterson stood slowly, adjusting his vest with deliberate precision. "Well then, it seems the mountain has come to Mohammed. Shall we greet our visitors?" They met Blackwood's party in the ranch yard, where Daniel's men had casually formed a loose semicircle, their presence unmistakable despite their relaxed postures. Pete was cleaning his rifle with exaggerated care, while Carlos, who shouldn't have been out of bed yet, leaned against a fence post with his hand resting meaningfully on his pistol. Dr. Blackwood, Judge Patterson said pleasantly, as if greeting an old friend at a social gathering. What brings you all the way from Boston to our humble corner of Wyoming? Blackwood's eyes found Clara immediately, his face twisting with triumph and rage. I've come to retrieve stolen property and a fugitive from justice. He pulled a folded document from his coat. I have a warrant for the arrest of Clara Monroe, signed by a Massachusetts judge. How interesting, Patterson said, not reaching for the document. And what authority does a Massachusetts judge have in Wyoming territory? The authority of law and civilized society, Blackwood snapped. This woman is a thief and a fraud. She stole valuable medical equipment from Massachusetts General Hospital and has been practicing medicine without proper credentials. Without proper credentials? Daniel's voice was dangerously quiet. She trained at your own hospital for 5 years. As a nurse, Blackwood said dismissively, nurses assist. They don't diagnose, they don't operate, and they certainly don't contradict the medical opinions of qualified physicians. Even when those physicians are wrong, Clara found her voice stepping forward despite her fear. Even when a child's life hangs in the balance. You overstepped your bounds, Blackwood snarled. You humiliated me in front of the board, in front of Senator Morrison. I saved his daughter's life. By pure luck, you had no right to make that diagnosis, no authority to recommend surgery. You could have killed that child with your arrogance. But I didn't kill her. You would have with your misdiagnosis of hysteria for a condition requiring immediate surgery. The two faced each other across the yard, years of resentment and fury crackling between them. Blackwood's companions shifted nervously, clearly uncomfortable with the armed cowboys surrounding them. Judge Patterson cleared his throat. Dr. Blackwood, while your warrant may carry weight in Massachusetts, Wyoming territory has its own laws and procedures. Miss Monroe would need to be formally charged here, evidence presented to our territorial court. I don't give a damn about your frontier justice, Blackwood interrupted. She's coming back with me to face proper charges in a civilized court. No, Daniel said simply. She's not. Blackwood turned his attention to Daniel, looking him up and down with obvious disdain. And who are you to interfere with the law? Daniel Hayes. I own this ranch and most of the land you rode across to get here. Miss Monroe is my employee and under my protection. Your employee? Blackwood laughed unpleasantly. Is that what you call it? I've heard about you frontier men buying women like cattle. The sound of 40 rifles being cocked simultaneously cut through the air like thunder. Every one of Daniel's men had their weapon trained on Blackwood's party. Choose your next words very carefully, Doctor, Daniel said softly. You're talking about a lady, and we take such insults seriously out here. One of Blackwood's companions, younger and clearly terrified, tugged at the doctor's sleeve. Sir, perhaps we should— Silence! Blackwood shrugged him off, but Clara could see the fear beginning to creep into his eyes as he truly registered the situation. You can't threaten officers of the law. I don't see any officers, Pete called out. Just a bunch of soft city boys who rode onto private property without invitation. Judge Patterson held up a hand for calm. Gentlemen, let's resolve this peacefully. Dr. Blackwood, you've made serious accusations. Do you have proof that Miss Monroe stole from your hospital? The instruments in her possession are proof enough. Instruments that could have been purchased anywhere, Patterson interrupted. Do you have documentation showing these specific items were hospital property? Blackwood's face grew redder. She was a nurse. Where would she get money for such equipment? From her savings, Clara said. From 5 years of living frugally, of saving every penny because I dreamed of one day opening my own practice. Every instrument in my bag was either a graduation gift or purchased with receipts I could provide. If you hadn't undoubtedly destroyed them when you had my lodgings ransacked. Lies hit. Truth, so Daniel said. And here's another truth. Blackwood. In the 2 weeks Miss Monroe has been here, she's saved 4 lives directly and prevented dozens of other deaths through proper medical care. She set a boy's broken leg that would have left him crippled. She saved a man torn apart by a mountain cat. She delivered a baby that would have killed both mother and child without her intervention. What have you done lately besides chase a woman across the country because she wounded your pride? This isn't about pride, isn't it? Clara stepped closer to Blackwood, no longer afraid. This is about the fact that I was right and you were wrong. That a mere nurse saw what the great Dr. Blackwood missed. You've destroyed my career, driven me from my home, pursued me across half the continent, all because you couldn't admit you made a mistake. You had no right. I had every right. Clara's voice rang across the yard. I took an oath to do no harm, to help those in need. That oath doesn't say, unless it embarrasses a superior, that child would have died because of your arrogance, and you know it. Blackwood's hand moved toward his coat, and instantly 40 rifles swung toward him. He froze. I wouldn't, Tom advised mildly. The boys are a mite trigger-happy when it comes to protecting Doc Monroe. Doc Monroe, Blackwood laughed bitterly. She's not a doctor. She's a nurse who forgot her place, and I'll see her in prison where she belongs. Actually, Judge Patterson said thoughtfully, that brings up an interesting point. Miss Monroe, in your time here, have you presented yourself as a medical doctor? No, sir. I've been clear that I'm a nurse with surgical training. And yet the community calls you Doc Monroe. A term of respect and affection, Daniel explained. Out here, anyone with medical knowledge who helps people gets called Doc. And has Miss Monroe been practicing medicine? She's been providing medical care under my employment and authority, Daniel said carefully. As the owner of this ranch, I have the right to provide for the health and welfare of my employees by whatever means I deem necessary. Patterson nodded slowly. And the people from neighboring ranches who come for treatment. Neighbors helping neighbors. No money changes hands for those services. Miss Monroe treats them as my representative, an extension of the Double H's long-standing tradition of community support. Clara watched this legal dance with growing hope. Judge Patterson was clearly working to find a framework that would protect her while staying within the bounds of territorial law. Dr. Blackwood, Patterson said finally, I've reviewed your warrant and your claims. While Massachusetts may have its own opinions on this matter here in Wyoming Territory, I see no evidence of theft. Miss Monroe's medical instruments appear to be her personal property. As for practicing medicine without credentials, she's operating under the authority of a private employer on private land, which is perfectly legal. This is preposterous, Blackwood exploded. You're protecting a criminal. I'm upholding territorial law, Patterson said calmly. If you wish to pursue this matter, you'll need to file charges in our territorial court, provide concrete evidence of theft, and argue your case before a Wyoming judge and jury. A jury of these cowboys? Blackwood gestured dismissively at Daniel's men. A jury of her peers, Patterson corrected. Fair warning. Dr. Wyoming juries don't look kindly on men who persecute women, especially women who've proven themselves valuable to the community. Blackwood turned to his companions. Deputy Marshal Harrison, arrest this woman immediately. The man he addressed, wearing a federal badge, shifted uncomfortably. Sir, I only have authority if federal laws were broken. This seems to be a state matter, and Judge Patterson is correct about jurisdiction. Coward, Blackwood spat. You're all cowards bowing to these frontier thugs. Careful, Blackwood, Daniel warned. You're testing my patience. Is that a threat? It's a promise. You came onto my land, insulted my people, and attempted to kidnap a woman under my protection. In Wyoming, we have ways of dealing with such men that don't involve courts. The tension in the yard ratcheted up another notch. Clara could see several of Blackwood's companions reaching for weapons they probably didn't know how to use, while Daniel's men shifted into better firing positions. Stop, Clara said suddenly, her voice cutting through the tension. This has gone far enough. She walked directly to Blackwood, close enough that she could smell the pomade in his hair, see the broken blood vessels in his nose from too much brandy. You want me destroyed because I embarrassed you, she said quietly. Fine. You've done that. I can never practice in Boston again, never work in a proper hospital. You've won Dr. Blackwood. Isn't that enough? Not until you pay for your crimes. Well, what crime saving a child? Using knowledge you refuse to acknowledge I had. Being right when you were wrong. Clara's voice rose. Or is my real crime being a woman who refused to stay silent? You forget yourself. No, I finally remember myself. Clara straightened her spine. I remember that I'm a healer regardless of what you say. I remember that I've saved lives you would have lost. And I remember that I don't need your approval or your credentials to do what I was born to do. She turned to address everyone in the yard, Daniel's men, Blackwood's party, the women and children who had crept closer to watch the confrontation. Yes, I was a nurse at Massachusetts General. Yes, I contradicted Dr. Blackwood's diagnosis. And yes, I was right. The child lived because I spoke up. If that's a crime, then I'm guilty. But I would do it again 1,000 times over, because saving lives matters more than salvaging pride. A murmur ran through the crowd, and Clara saw Maria step forward holding her swollen belly. "This woman saved my baby," Maria announced. "Saw something wrong that would have killed us both come birthing time. Don't care what she calls herself, nurse doctor or angel sent from heaven. She stays." "She saved my boy's leg," another woman called out. "Pulled 3 of my rotten teeth without hardly any pain," Pete added. "Stitched me up better than new," Carlos said painfully, straightening from his fence post. One by one, people began testifying. Every person Clara had treated in her 2 weeks at the Double H had a story. The crowd grew as more ranch families arrived, drawn by the commotion, and the testimonies continued. Blackwood's face grew progressively darker as he realized he was losing control of the situation. "This is mob rule. This is Wyoming," Judge Patterson said with satisfaction. "Dr. Blackwood, I strongly suggest you and your party return to town. The evening stage leaves for Denver at 6. You can catch the Eastern train from there." "I'm not leaving without—" The sound of a rifle shot split the air. Everyone ducked instinctively, hands going to weapons, but it was only Tom's smoke rising from his rifle barrel as he calmly reloaded. "Sorry," he said mildly. "Thought I saw a snake. Dangerous creatures, snakes. Never know when one might strike." The message was clear. Blackwood's younger companion tugged at his arm urgently. "Sir, we should go. Now. This isn't over," Blackwood snarled at Clara. "I have influence connections. I'll make sure you never practice medicine anywhere in America." "Then I'll practice it here," Clara said simply. "Where credentials matter less than capability, where people judge by actions rather than titles." Daniel stepped forward, placing himself between Clara and Blackwood. "You've got 30 seconds to get off my land. After that, I won't be responsible for what happens." "You're threatening a—" 20 seconds. Blackwood's companions were already mounting their horses, the deputy marshal practically dragging the doctor toward his rented mount. "You'll regret this," Blackwood shouted as they rode away. "All of you, I'll see this whole ranch destroyed." "He's welcome to try," Daniel said quietly, watching them go. As the dust settled from their departure, Clara found herself surrounded by the ranch community. Women hugged her. Men tipped their hats, children tugged at her skirts. The support was overwhelming, and she felt tears streaming down her face. Now, Judge Patterson said kindly. "No tears, young lady. You've won a significant victory today." "But he's right," Clara said. "He has connections, influence. He could make trouble for the ranch for Daniel." "Let him try," Daniel said, his arm coming around her shoulders. "The Double H has weathered worse storms than one bitter doctor from Boston." Judge Patterson pulled out his journal, making notes. "I'll file a report with the territorial government, making it clear that Miss Monroe is operating under legitimate authority. I'll also send word to some colleagues back east about Dr. Blackwood's behavior. He's not the only one with connections, and his pursuit of a woman across the country over a bruised ego won't play well in certain circles." "You do that for me." "For you and for justice," Patterson said. "What you did speaking up for that child showed more courage than most doctors possess. We need people like you in Wyoming, Miss Monroe. Don't let anyone tell you otherwise." As the judge prepared to leave, he pulled Daniel aside for a private word. Clara couldn't hear what was said, but she saw Daniel nod seriously, then smile. That evening, the ranch held an impromptu celebration. Rosa and the kitchen girls prepared a feast, someone brought out a fiddle, and soon the dining hall was filled with music and laughter. Clara tried to beg off, emotionally exhausted from the day's confrontation, but the ranch hands wouldn't hear of it. "You stood up to that bastard, pardon ma'am, that fellow from Boston," Pete said, pressing a glass of whiskey into her hand. "That deserves celebrating. Besides," Tom added with a grin, "it's not every day we get to run off city folks. Most fun we've had in months." Clara found herself passed from partner to partner as the men took turns dancing with her, their steps rough but enthusiastic. Even Carlos, who definitely should have been in bed, managed a slow turn around the floor. "You see, señorita," he said, "I told you we protect our own." Daniel watched from his position near the fireplace, a small smile playing at his lips. When the music finally slowed, he crossed to Clara and held out his hand. "My turn, I think." The other dancers cleared the floor as Daniel pulled Clara into his arms. He danced with surprising grace, leading her through a waltz that belonged more in a Boston ballroom than a ranch dining hall. "Where did you learn to dance like this?" Clara asked, breathless. "Margaret taught me, said even a cowboy should know how to properly court a lady." "Is that what you're doing?" "Courting me." Daniel's hand tightened on her waist. "Would that be unwelcome?" Clara thought about the morning's confrontation, about Blackwood's threats, and the uncertain future. Then she thought about Daniel standing between her and danger, about the community that had rallied to protect her, about the life she was building here. "No," she said softly. "It wouldn't be unwelcome at all." He spun her once more, then pulled her closer than was strictly proper. "Good. Because Judge Patterson had some interesting news. Apparently, Wyoming Territory is about to pass legislation allowing women to vote, hold property, and practice professions on equal terms with men. You could take the medical certification exam, become a legally recognized doctor." Clara stopped dancing, staring up at him. That's not possible. This is Wyoming. We do things differently here." He touched her cheek gently. "You could be one of the first female doctors in America, Clara. Legal and legitimate." "But I'm not a doctor. I'm a nurse with surgical training." "You're a healer," Daniel corrected. "The rest is just paperwork. And I have a proposition for you." Claire's heart raced. "What kind of proposition?" "The town needs a proper hospital. I've been thinking about funding one, but I needed the right person to run it. Someone with Eastern training but Western practicality. Someone who cares more about patients than protocol." "Daniel, I couldn't—" "You could. You've proven that already." He pulled her back into the dance. "Think about it. A real hospital with proper equipment and beds for patients. You could train other nurses, maybe even bring in a doctor from Denver to work under your supervision." "Under my supervision?" Clara laughed at the audacity of it. "No doctor would work under a nurse." "They would work under Dr. Monroe, though, especially if Dr. Monroe's hospital was the only one within 100 miles. The vision was intoxicating. A hospital of her own where she could practice medicine freely, where she could save lives without asking permission or deferring to male colleagues who might be wrong. "It's a beautiful dream," she said wistfully. "It doesn't have to be just a dream." Daniel's voice was intense. "Clara, you've brought something back to life in this ranch, in this community, in me. Let me give you something in return." You already have. You gave me sanctuary protection of purpose. "I want to give you more." He stopped dancing again, his hands framing her face. "I want to give you everything. The hospital, yes, but also, Clara, these 2 weeks watching you work, seeing your courage today. I'm falling in love with you." The words hung between them, momentous and terrifying. Around them, Clara was vaguely aware that the music had stopped, that everyone was watching, but she couldn't look away from Daniel's eyes. "It's too soon," she whispered. "You barely know me." "I know enough. I know you're brave and brilliant and compassionate. I know you make me want to be a better man. I know that when Blackwood threatened you, I wanted to tear him apart with my bare hands." His thumb stroked her cheekbone. "I know that I haven't felt this alive since Margaret died, and I know she would have loved you." "Daniel, you don't have to answer now. Just think about it. About all of it. The hospital, the medical certification, and us." Before Clara could respond, Rosa burst into the dining hall, her face panicked. "Doc Monroe, come quick. It's Maria, the baby's coming." Clara's mind immediately shifted into medical mode. "But she's not due for another month." "I know. And there's blood, lots of blood." Clara ran for her medical bag. Daniel right behind her. They found Maria in her cabin, Tom holding her hand while she writhed in pain. One look told Clara this was the emergency she'd been dreading, The placenta was detaching early, a condition that could kill both mother and child within minutes. "Everyone out except Rosa and Daniel," Clara commanded, already rolling up her sleeves. "Rosa, I need hot water and all the clean cloths you can find. Daniel, I need you to hold her still. This is going to be difficult." "Clara," Maria gasped between contractions, "save my baby, please. If you have to choose—" "I'm not choosing. I'm saving you both." Clara examined Maria quickly, her mind racing through options. The baby needed to come out immediately, but Maria was losing too much blood. "The baby's in distress," she told Daniel quietly, "and Maria's bleeding internally. I need to deliver the baby now and stop the hemorrhaging, or we'll lose them both. Tell me what to do." "Hold her shoulders. Rosa, you take her legs. This is going to hurt Maria, but I need you to push when I say as hard as you can." What followed was the most intense medical crisis Clara had faced since arriving at the Double H. The baby was turned wrong, and she had to reach in and manually adjust its position while Maria screamed in agony. Blood soaked through cloth after cloth as Clara fought to deliver the child quickly enough to save it, but carefully enough not to worsen Maria's hemorrhaging. "Push Maria now." With a final tremendous effort, Maria pushed, and Clara guided the baby out, a tiny girl, blue and still. Without hesitation, Clara cleared the baby's airways and began rubbing her vigorously stimulating circulation while Rosa tied off the umbilical cord. "Come on, little one," Clara muttered, working with desperate efficiency. "Breathe for me." The seconds stretched like hours before the baby suddenly gasped, then let out a weak but definite cry. Clara nearly sobbed with relief, quickly wrapping the infant and handing her to Daniel before turning back to Maria. "The baby?" Maria asked weakly. "She's alive," Clara assured her, "but I need to stop your bleeding now. Stay with me, Maria." The next hour tested every skill Clara possessed. She packed the hemorrhaging with clean cloths, applied pressure at specific points to slow the bleeding, and administered ergot to help the uterus contract. Slowly, agonizingly, the bleeding decreased to a manageable level. By dawn, Maria was stable, weak, but alive, holding her tiny daughter while Tom wept openly beside them. Clara sat in the corner, exhausted beyond measure, blood staining her dress and hands. "You did it," Daniel said quietly, sitting beside her. "You saved them both." "It was close, too close." Clara's hands shook with delayed reaction. "If we'd had a proper hospital with better equipment—" "Then we'll build one," Daniel said firmly. "Whatever you need, however much it costs." "That's my decision." Clara looked at him. This man who'd pulled her from a frozen death and given her a new life. "Why?" she asked. "Why do all this for me?" "Haven't you figured it out yet?" Daniel took her blood-stained hand in his. "I love you, Clara Monroe. I loved you from the moment you stood up in that dining hall and told Pete you could hold down a bleeding man. I loved you when you set Jimmy's leg without flinching. I loved you when you stood up to Blackwood today. And I loved you tonight watching you fight death itself for Maria and her baby." Clara felt tears rolling down her cheeks. "I don't know how to love anymore. Blackwood destroyed my ability to trust, to believe in happiness." "Then learn again. Here with me with people who value you for who you really are." Daniel wiped away her tears with gentle fingers. "Take all the time you need. I'm not going anywhere." A commotion outside interrupted them. Tom stuck his head in, grinning despite his emotional exhaustion. "Boss, you need to see this." Outside, the entire ranch had gathered. As Clara emerged, they burst into applause. Someone had hung a banner between two posts that read "Doc Monroe, Miracle Worker." "Speech, someone called out, and others took up the chant. Clara stood before them, these rough cowboys and frontier women who'd accepted her without question, who'd stood against Blackwood's threats, who called her Doc and meant it as the highest compliment. "I'm not a miracle worker," she said, her voice carrying across the yard. "I'm just someone who was given a second chance when I needed it most. You've all given me that, a chance to practice my calling, to be useful, to belong somewhere again." She looked at Daniel, standing proud beside her. "The Double H took me in when I had nothing, when I was nobody. You've made me part of something bigger than myself. So if you'll have me, I'd like to stay, permanently." The cheer that went up could probably be heard in Cheyenne. Cowboys threw their hats in the air, women hugged each other, and children danced around excitedly. "Is that a yes to everything?" Daniel asked quietly, for her ears only. Clara looked at him, this complicated, wonderful man who'd saved her in every way a person could be saved. "Ask me again in a month," she said. "Court me properly as Margaret taught you, then ask me again." "I'll ask you every day if necessary," Daniel promised. As the sun rose fully over the Wyoming mountains, painting the ranch in shades of gold, and rose, Clara felt something she hadn't experienced in months. Not just hope, but certainty. This was where she belonged. These were her people. And that man looking at her like she was everything good in the world. He was her future. Blackwood could threaten all he wanted from Boston. He couldn't touch what she'd found here, acceptance, purpose, and a love that was growing stronger with each passing day. The Double H had given her sanctuary, but more than that, it had given her home. Tom appeared at her elbow, grinning. "Hate to interrupt Doc, but Jimmy's complaining his leg itches something fierce. Says he needs you to look at it." "He probably needs to bathe," Clara said with fond exasperation. "But I'll check." As she walked toward the bunkhouse, she heard Daniel addressing the crowd, talking about plans for the hospital, about making the Double H a place where no one would die from lack of medical care. His voice was strong and certain, and Clara knew he would make it happen. Daniel Hayes was a man who kept his promises. "Hey, Doc Monroe," Pete called out. "Welcome to the family." Family. The word settled warm in Clara's chest. She'd lost everything in Boston career, reputation, home. But here in the harsh beauty of Wyoming, she'd gained something far more valuable. She'd gained a family of choice, a community of outcasts and survivors who'd banded together against the wilderness and won. And at the center of it all was Daniel, watching her with those whiskey eyes that promised adventures she'd never dreamed of. A month, she'd told him. A month to court her properly, to prove that what was between them was more than just crisis and proximity. But in her heart, Clara already knew. She'd fallen in love with him somewhere between that first kiss under the stars and watching him hold Maria's newborn daughter with gentle hands. She'd fallen in love with this entire impossible life, the ranch, the people, the endless sky that made her feel both small and infinite. As Clara made her way to the bunkhouse to check on Jimmy's leg, she reflected on how quickly her life had transformed. Just weeks ago, she'd been ready to die on that train platform, and now she was planning a future she'd never dared imagine. The morning sun warmed her face as she walked, and she could hear Daniel's voice carrying across the yard, still addressing the gathered crowd about the hospital plans. Jimmy was indeed complaining loudly when she entered the bunkhouse, surrounded by sympathetic cowboys who were clearly enjoying the drama. His leg, elevated on pillows, looked fine from a distance, but Clara knew better than to dismiss any complaint without proper examination. "It itches something fierce, Doc," Jimmy whined. "Like there's ants crawling under the splints." "That's actually a good sign," Clara said, carefully examining the limb. "It means the bone is beginning to knit. The healing process can cause itching." She checked his toes, still pink and warm, and adjusted the splint slightly. "You're healing remarkably well, Jimmy. Another few weeks and we can start thinking about getting you on crutches." "Really?" The boy's face lit up. "Tom said I'd be laid up for 3 months at least." "Tom's not a doctor," Clara said with a smile. "Though you will need to be careful for the full 3 months. No riding, no running, and absolutely no climbing into barn lofts." The men laughed, and Pete clapped Jimmy on the shoulder. "Hear that, boy? You follow Doc's orders, you'll be dancing at the spring social." "There's a spring social?" Clara asked. "Every year," Tom said from the doorway. He'd left Maria's side briefly to check on the men. "Biggest event in the county. All the ranches come together for a weekend of dancing, horse racing, and general celebration. Of course, this year will be special." "Why's that?" Tom grinned. "Because this year we'll have something extra to celebrate. Our Doc's saving lives running off Boston buzzards, and if the boss has his way, maybe announcing some other news too." The men exchanged knowing looks that made Clara blush. Daniel's intentions toward her were apparently an open secret on the ranch, and from the approving smiles it seemed everyone supported the match. "Don't you all have work to do?" she asked, trying to sound stern. "Yes, ma'am," they chorused, but their grins didn't fade as they filed out, leaving her with Jimmy. "Doc Monroe," Jimmy said when they were alone. "Can I ask you something?" "Of course." "That man from Boston, the one who wanted to take you back, he was lying about you being a thief, wasn't he?" Clara sat on the edge of his bed. "What makes you think that?" "Because I was a thief once before Mr. Hayes took me in. I know what guilty looks like, and you didn't look guilty. You looked—" He searched for the word righteous, like my ma used to look when she was protecting me from my pa. "Oh, your mother sounds like she was a brave woman." "She was. She died protecting me." Jimmy's young face was solemn. "Mr. Hayes, he protected you the same way. He'd have killed that Boston man if he'd tried to take you. We all would have." The fierce loyalty in the boy's voice made Clara's throat tight. "I hope it never comes to that." "Me too. But Doc, you should know we've all got stories here. Things we're running from or things we survived. You're one of us now. That means something." Clara squeezed his hand. "It means everything, Jimmy." She left the bunkhouse to find Daniel waiting for her, his expression thoughtful. "Walk with me." They strolled toward the small cemetery on the hill, a path Daniel clearly walked often. The lone oak tree was beginning to bud tiny green shoots, promising spring despite the lingering cold. "I come here when I need to think," Daniel said, stopping before a beautifully carved headstone. "Margaret Elizabeth Hayes, beloved wife and mother." And beside her, Daniel Jr., our angel. "Tell me about her," Clara said softly. Daniel was quiet for a long moment. "She was nothing like what my father wanted for me. He'd arranged a match with a banker's daughter from Denver, all pale skin and proper manners. Then I met Margaret at a horse auction. She was bidding against me for a mare, driving the price up just to spite me because I'd made some comment about women not understanding horse flesh." Clara smiled. "She sounds formidable." "She was magnificent. Dark hair that caught fire in the sunlight, eyes like midnight, and a temper that could strip paint off a barn." Daniel's voice was warm with memory. "She won that horse, by the way. Paid twice what it was worth just to prove her point. I proposed to her a month later. Your father must have been furious. He threatened to disinherit me, said I was throwing away the ranch's future for a Mexican woman who'd bring nothing but shame to the Hayes name." Daniel's jaw tightened. "I told him the ranch could burn for all I cared if it meant losing Margaret. But he didn't disinherit you." "No. Because Margaret was smarter than all of us. She charmed the banker's daughter my father wanted me to marry, became her friend, and convinced her to marry the banker's son instead. Then she negotiated a loan agreement between the bank and the ranch that saved us during the drought of '84. My father died still hating her, but he couldn't deny she'd saved his legacy." Clara studied the headstone, noting the fresh flowers someone Daniel probably had placed there recently. "How did she die?" "You said childbirth, but she was strong through the whole pregnancy, working until the day her water broke. But the baby was wrong, turned sideways. The doctor—" Daniel's voice cracked. "He was drunk. Took him 3 hours to arrive, and by then Margaret had lost too much blood. He tried to turn the baby, but his hands were shaking. He tore her inside." Clara closed her eyes, seeing too clearly what must have happened. "Daniel, I'm so sorry. She lived long enough to hold our son. 20 minutes, maybe 30. She named him, told me to be happy to find love again. Then she was gone, and the baby followed an hour later. His lungs weren't fully formed." Daniel touched the headstone gently. "I buried them together so she could hold him forever." They stood in silence for a moment, the wind whispering through the oak's bare branches. Then Daniel turned to Clara, his expression intense. "When I saw you on that platform half dead and giving up, something in me recognized a kindred spirit. We'd both been broken by loss, by betrayal. But you fought back, Clara. You stood up to Blackwood, you saved Maria and her baby, you brought life back to this ranch. You brought me back to life. Daniel, I know you asked for a month, and I'll give you that. I'll court you with flowers and poetry if that's what you want. But I need you to know I'm not a patient man by nature. Every day I don't wake up with you beside me feels like a day wasted." Clara's heart raced at his words, at the raw honesty in them. "I'm not Margaret. I can't replace her." "I don't want you to be Margaret. I want you to be Clara, brilliant, brave Clara, who performs surgery on kitchen tables and stands up to bullies from Boston. I love you for who you are, not as a replacement for who I lost." Before Clara could respond, they heard shouting from the ranch. Tom was running toward them, his face urgent. "Boss, we've got trouble riders coming in fast from the south, looks like the Brennan gang." Daniel's expression went hard. "How many so?" 15, maybe 20, armed and looking for trouble. The Brennan gang. Clara had heard the name whispered in town, a group of outlaws who'd been terrorizing the territory for months. They specialized in hitting remote ranches, stealing cattle and horses, sometimes worse. Get everyone to defensive positions, Daniel ordered. Women and children in the main house, men to their posts. And Tom give Clara a rifle. I don't know how to shoot, Clara protested as they ran back toward the ranch. Then stay in the house and keep low. Daniel grabbed her arm. Promise me, Clara. No heroics. But as they reached the ranch, Clara could see the riders approaching and her medical instincts overrode everything else. There might be wounded. There will be wounded if you don't get inside, Daniel said firmly, pushing her toward the house. Rosa, take her and keep her safe. Rosa grabbed Clara's arm, pulling her inside where the women and children were already gathering. Maria, despite having given birth hours ago, was sitting up with her baby, a rifle across her lap. You shouldn't be up, Clara said. They threaten my home, I defend it, Maria said simply. Besides, I'm a better shot than half the men, even weak as I am. Through the windows, Clara watched Daniel's men take positions behind water troughs, fence posts, and barn doors. Daniel himself stood in the open, his rifle casual in his hands but ready. The riders thundered into the yard, their leader, a man with a scarred face and cold eyes, pulling up just short of Daniel. Hayes, what? The man said. Jack Brennan. Heard you had some trouble with Eastern folks. Thought you might be distracted enough to miss some cattle. You heard wrong, Brennan. Turn around and ride out and nobody has to die today. Brennan laughed an ugly sound. 20 against 40, I like those odds, especially when half your 40 are probably soft from winter. Besides, we're not just here for cattle. Heard you got yourself a lady doctor. We've got wounded men who could use tending. Over my dead body, Daniel said quietly. That can be arranged. Brennan's hand moved toward his gun, but Daniel was faster. The shot echoed across the yard and Brennan's gun went flying, his hand bloody. Next one goes in your head, Daniel said calmly. Your move. For a moment nobody moved. Then all hell broke loose. The yard erupted in gunfire. Clara saw men diving for cover, heard bullets thudding into wood and whining off metal. Through it all, Daniel stood like a statue, firing with deadly accuracy, picking off Brennan's men one by one. Get down! Rosa screamed, pulling Clara to the floor as windows shattered above them. But Clara had seen Pete take a bullet in the shoulder, saw him fall behind a water trough. Without thinking, she grabbed her medical bag and crawled toward the door. No! Rosa tried to stop her, but Clara was already outside running, crouched low across the yard. She reached Pete as he was trying to reload, one-handed blood soaking his shirt. You crazy woman, he gasped. Get back inside. Shut up and let me work, Clara said, already cutting away his shirt. The bullet had gone through, cleanly missing the major vessels, but he was losing blood fast. She packed the wound, working even as bullets flew overhead. Doc Monroe! She heard Daniel's voice, furious and frightened. Get to cover. But she'd seen Carlos go down too, clutching his thigh, and she couldn't leave him. She ran to him next, sliding in the dirt beside him as a bullet kicked up dust inches from her head. You're loco? Carlos gasped, but he didn't protest as she tied off a tourniquet above the wound in his leg. The gunfight raged for what felt like hours, but was probably only minutes. Then suddenly, it was over. Brennan's men who could still ride were fleeing, leaving their dead and wounded behind. Brennan himself lay in the dirt, Daniel's rifle pointed at his head. You're done in this territory, Daniel said coldly. Take your wounded and get out. If I see you within 50 miles of my ranch again, I'll kill you myself. You can't. I can and I will. Sheriff Morrison will back me up, self-defense against known outlaws. Your choice, Brennan. Run or die. Brennan struggled to his feet, cradling his wounded hand. His remaining men loaded their wounded onto horses, not gently, and the whole group rode out defeated and humiliated. Only then did Daniel turn to Clara, his face a mask of fury. What the hell were you thinking? Pete and Carlos were wounded. They could have waited. You could have been killed, and they could have bled to death while we argued about it. Clara shot back, her own adrenaline turning to anger. I'm a nurse, Daniel. I see wounded. I help them. That's what I do. Not in the middle of a gunfight. Especially in the middle of a gunfight. They stood facing each other, both breathing hard, while around them the ranch hands began emerging from cover. Several were wounded. Nothing fatal, thanks to good cover and better shooting, but Clara had work to do. We'll discuss this later, she said, turning away from Daniel. Right now I have patience. She worked through the afternoon cleaning and stitching wounds, extracting bullets, administering laudanum for pain. The main house became a makeshift hospital, with wounded men lying on every available surface. Daniel helped his anger apparently cooled, though Clara could feel him watching her with an intensity that made her skin prickle. When she finally finished with the last patient, Jimmy, who'd somehow managed to graze his arm despite being bedridden, Daniel caught her arm. "We need to talk." He led her to his study, a room she'd never been in before. It was masculine but warm, with leather-bound books, a massive desk, and a painting of Margaret on the wall. Daniel poured 2 glasses of whiskey, handing her one without asking if she wanted it. "You could have been killed today," he said quietly. "So could you. You stood in the open like you were invincible. I was protecting my land, my people. And I was protecting them too, just differently." Clara took a sip of whiskey, feeling it burn down her throat. "Daniel, I can't be the kind of woman who hides while others fight. It's not who I am." "I know." He sat heavily in his chair. "God help me, I know. When I saw you out there running through bullets to help Pete, I've never been so terrified and so proud at the same time." "Then why are you angry?" "Because I can't lose you." The words came out raw, desperate. "I lost Margaret because I couldn't protect her from nature, from biology. But bullets, those I can protect you from if you'd let me." Clara set down her glass and moved to stand before him. "You can't protect me from everything, Daniel, and I wouldn't want you to. I'm not some delicate Eastern flower that needs to be kept under glass." "No," he agreed, looking up at her. "You're a force of nature, like a tornado, beautiful and terrifying and impossible to control." "Is that a compliment?" "It's a fact." He pulled her onto his lap, his arms going around her waist. "You saved 2 more lives today, maybe 3. The men are already composing songs about the doc who runs through gunfire to save cowboys. They're exaggerating. They're not exaggerating enough." His hand came up to cup her face. "Clara Monroe, you are the most magnificent, infuriating, brave woman I've ever known, and I'm so in love with you I can't think straight." Clara's heart stopped, then started again, double time. "It hasn't been a month yet." "To hell with the month." He pulled her closer. "Marry me." "Daniel." "Marry me," he repeated. "Not in a month, not after proper courting. Now, today. Judge Patterson is still in town. He could—" Clara silenced him with a kiss, pouring all her fear and love and desire into it. When they broke apart, both were breathing hard. "Is that a yes?" Daniel asked hopefully. "That's a ask me again when we're not both running on adrenaline and whiskey," Clara said, but she was smiling. "I won't marry you in a rush, Daniel Hayes. When I marry you, and I will marry you, it's going to be proper, with flowers and a dress, and the whole ranch watching." "When—" His arms tightened around her. "Not if—" "When?" Clara confirmed. "Because I love you too, you impossible man. I loved you when you wrapped your coat around me at the station. I loved you when you stood between me and Blackwood. I loved you when you held Maria's baby like she was made of spun glass. And I loved you today when you faced down 20 outlaws to protect this ranch. But you still won't marry me today." "No, because you deserve better than a rushed wedding born of fear and gunfire. And so do I." She kissed him again softly this time. "Court me, Daniel. Show this ranch, this town, that we're choosing each other freely. Then marry me in the spring when the wildflowers are blooming and Jimmy can dance at our wedding." Daniel groaned but nodded. "You're going to make me wait months." "Good things are worth waiting for," Clara said primly, then gasped as he stood, suddenly lifting her with him. "Then I'm going to court you so thoroughly that you'll be begging me to marry you before spring comes," he promised. "Every day, Clara Monroe. Every single day I'm going to show you why you belong here with me." The next weeks proved Daniel was a man of his word. He courted Clara with an intensity that had the entire ranch watching in amusement. Flowers appeared on her desk daily, not cultivated roses, but wild prairie blooms that he rode out at dawn to gather. He brought her coffee exactly how she liked it during her long medical sessions. He read to her in the evenings from books of poetry that made the rough cowboys snicker until his glare silenced them. But it wasn't just the romantic gestures that won Clara's heart completely. It was the way he supported her work absolutely. When she mentioned needing better surgical instruments, a package arrived from Denver within a week. When she worried about Maria's slow recovery, he arranged for a specialist from Chicago to consult by telegram. When she suggested teaching some of the ranch women basic medical care, he immediately offered the main house's parlor as a classroom. The ranch thrived under their joint care. Clara's medical presence meant injuries were treated before they became serious illnesses caught early, and the general health of the community improved dramatically. The women especially flourished under her care, finally having someone who understood their specific needs and concerns. Tom's wife, Maria, recovered fully, her baby growing strong and healthy. She named the girl Clara Tzpauta, for the angel who saved us both. Though Clara protested, she was no angel.
"You are to us," Maria insisted. "You and Mr. Hayes both. Angels don't always come from heaven. Sometimes they come from train stations and frozen nights." 2 weeks after the gunfight, unexpected visitors arrived. A delegation from the territorial government led by Governor Morrison himself rode into the Double H with an escort of territorial marshals. Clara's blood went cold, certain Blackwood had somehow managed to pursue his vendetta, but the governor's first words eased her fears. "Mr. Hayes, Miss Monroe, I'm here on official business, but it's good business." The governor, a dignified man with silver whiskers, dismounted and approached them. "Word of recent events has reached us both, the confrontation with Dr. Blackwood and the defeat of the Brennan gang. The territory owes you both a debt of gratitude." "We were protecting ourselves," Daniel said carefully. "Perhaps, but in doing so, you've solved a problem we've been struggling with for months. The Brennan gang has terrorized 3 counties. Your defeat of them has made you heroes in the territory." The governor turned to Clara. "And you, Miss Monroe, have become something of a legend yourself. A woman who stands up to Eastern authority, saves lives under fire, and practices medicine with a skill that puts most territorial doctors to shame." "I simply do what needs doing," Clara said. "Precisely the attitude we need." The governor pulled out an official-looking document. "Miss Monroe, the territory of Wyoming, is about to pass legislation allowing women full rights to practice medicine. We'd like you to be among the first to receive official certification. There will be an examination, of course, but frankly, it's a formality. Your work here speaks for itself." Clara's hands shook as she took the document. This is real, completely real. Wyoming intends to lead the nation in women's rights, Miss Monroe. You'll be making history." "She already has," Daniel said proudly, his arm going around Clara's waist. The governor smiled. "There's more. The territory wants to fund a hospital here in Cheyenne, a proper facility to serve the southeastern region. We'd like you to head it, Miss Monroe. Full autonomy, adequate funding, and the authority to train nurses and even doctors as you see fit." Clara felt her knees go weak. Everything she'd dreamed of was being offered freely. I don't know what to say." "Say yes," Daniel urged. "This is your moment, Clara. Our moment," she corrected, looking up at him. "None of this would be possible without you." The governor cleared his throat. "There is one small complication. Dr. Blackwood has filed formal complaints with several Eastern medical boards. While they have no authority here, they could make things difficult if you ever wanted to practice back east." "I don't," Clara said firmly. "Wyoming is my home now." "Good, because Wyoming needs you, Miss Monroe. Will you accept our offer?" Clara looked around the ranch at the men still recovering from their gunfight wounds, at the women who'd learned to trust her with their most intimate medical concerns, at the children who called her Doc Monroe with awe in their voices. Then she looked at Daniel, who was watching her with such pride and love that her heart felt too big for her chest. "Yes," she said, "I accept." The cheer that went up from the gathered ranch hands could probably be heard in Denver. As the governor and his delegation were ushered inside for refreshments, Daniel pulled Clara aside. "This is what you were meant for," he said softly. "To change the world one patient at a time. I couldn't have done any of it without you. You would have found a way. You're too strong to let someone like Blackwood win." He kissed her forehead. "But I'm glad I got to be part of your story." "Part of it," Clara laughed. "Daniel Hayes, you are my story.
Every chapter from that frozen night forward has been about us, you and me, and this impossible, wonderful life we're building together. That evening, the ranch celebrated again, this time with the governor and his delegation as honored guests. The territorial marshals, initially stiff and formal, relaxed under the influence of Rose's cooking and the ranch's potent whiskey. Stories were shared, songs were sung, and Clara found herself at the center of it all, no longer an outsider, but the heart of the Double H community. "Miss Monroe," the governor said during dinner, "I'm curious about your plans for the hospital. What's your vision?" Clara had been thinking about this since Daniel first mentioned it. "I want to create more than just a hospital. I want a teaching facility where women can learn nursing and even medicine, where Eastern techniques meet Western practicality, where no one dies because help is too far away or too drunk to come." Ambitious. Necessary, Clara corrected. This territory is growing. Families are settling, communities building. They need medical care that's accessible and reliable. I want to train a generation of healers who understand both the science of medicine and the art of caring for people. "And you, Mr. Hayes," the governor asked, "what's your stake in this?" Daniel's answer was simple. Clara's success is Wyoming's success, and Wyoming's success is good for all of us. Besides, he smiled at Clara. "I have a personal interest in keeping our doctor happy. I'm hoping to convince her to marry me this spring." The announcement wasn't a surprise to anyone at the ranch, but the governor raised his glass in toast. "To the future Dr. and Mrs. Hayes, then, may your union be as beneficial to the territory as it clearly is to each other." But even as they celebrated, Clara couldn't shake a feeling of unease. Blackwood wasn't the type to give up easily, and his influence in Eastern medical circles was substantial. He might not be able to touch her legally in Wyoming, but there were other ways to seek revenge. Her fears proved founded 3 days later when a package arrived from Boston. Inside was a newspaper clipping from the Boston Herald with a note in Blackwood's handwriting, "You may have won this battle, but the war is far from over." The article was devastating. Blackwood had given an interview painting Clara as a dangerous rogue nurse who'd fled west after stealing from the hospital and endangering patients with her reckless actions. He twisted every fact turned her heroism in saving the senator's daughter into dangerous insubordination, her surgical skills into unlicensed butchery. Clara's hand shook as she read the lies, each word carefully crafted to destroy any possibility of her ever practicing in the East again. But worse was the final paragraph where Blackwood mentioned the Double H, specifically suggesting that any ranch harboring such a dangerous individual must be investigated for other criminal activities. "He's trying to destroy you too," Clara said to Daniel, who'd read the article over her shoulder. "This is my fault. I brought this to your door. Stop." Daniel took the paper from her hands and deliberately tore it into pieces. "Blackwood can write whatever he wants in Boston papers. Out here, people know the truth. But your business connections, will either trust me or they won't. And if they choose to believe Blackwood over the evidence of their own eyes, then they're not people I want to do business with anyway." But Claire could see the worry in his eyes, the calculation of what this might cost him. The Double H's success depended partly on Eastern investors, on connections to markets in Chicago and beyond. If Blackwood poisoned those relationships, "I should leave," Claire said quietly. "If I go, maybe he'll—" "Don't." Daniel's voice was sharp. "Don't even think it. You think I'd let you face him alone? You think this ranch would let you go? Clara, look around you. This is your home. These are your people. We don't abandon our own because some bitter man in Boston writes lies in a newspaper." As if to prove his point, Tom appeared in the doorway with several other ranch hands. "Boss Doc, we heard about the article. Want us to pay this Blackwood fellow a visit. Pete knows some people in Boston who might be persuaded to make his life uncomfortable." "No violence," Daniel said firmly, though Clara could see he was touched by the offer. "We're not those kind of people." "Then what kind of people are we?" Carlos asked, leaning on his crutch. "The kind who build rather than destroy," Clara said, finding her strength again. "The kind who save lives rather than ruin them. The kind who stand together against bullies, whether they're outlaws or doctors." "Damn right, Pete said, then immediately apologized for his language. That night, unable to sleep, Clara walked out to the barn where she'd first treated Jimmy's broken leg. So much had changed in such a short time. She'd gone from a desperate woman ready to die to someone with purpose, with love,
with a future she couldn't have imagined. She found Daniel already there, brushing his black stallion by lamplight. He looked up when she entered, not surprised to see her. Couldn't sleep either. Too much thinking, Clara admitted. About Blackwood. About the hospital. About us. What about us? Daniel set down the brush and came to her, pulling her into his arms. Are you sure you want to marry me? I come with so much complication, so much scandal. Clara. He tilted her chin up to look at him. I would marry you if you came with a dozen Blackwoods trying to destroy you. I would marry you if every newspaper in America printed lies about you. I would marry you if the entire Eastern medical establishment lined up against you. Why? She whispered. Because you're the bravest person I know. Because you make me want to be better than I am. Because when I wake up in the morning, my first thought is whether you're safe and happy. Because when I go to sleep, my last thought is how lucky I am that you're here. He kissed her softly. Because I love you, Clara Monroe complications and all. Clara kissed him back, pouring all her love and gratitude into it. When they broke apart, she made a decision. Spring is too far away, she said. Daniel's eyes widened. What? Spring is too far away. I don't want to wait months to be your wife. I don't want to give Blackwood or anyone else time to interfere. I want to marry you now while we're surrounded by people who love us while the governor is still here to witness it. Clara, are you sure you wanted proper courting, a spring wedding? I wanted to be sure we were choosing each other for the right reasons. I'm sure now. I've been sure since you stood between me and Blackwood. Maybe I've been sure since you wrapped your coat around me at the train station. She took his face in her hands. Daniel Hayes, will you marry me tomorrow? Daniel's answer was to sweep Clara up in his arms and spin her around in the barn, making her laugh despite the seriousness of the moment. When he set her down, his eyes were bright with joy and something that looked like relief. Tomorrow, he agreed. At sunset, with everyone watching. Rosa will cook a feast, the men will clean up enough to be presentable, and you'll become Mrs. Daniel Hayes in front of God in Wyoming. I don't have a dress, Claire realized suddenly. I can't get married in a blood-stained medical apron. Margaret's wedding dress is still in storage, Daniel said quietly. She would want you to wear it. She would have loved you, Clara. You're everything she admired, strong, independent, dedicated to helping others. The next morning dawned clear and cold with the kind of crystalline sky that only Wyoming could produce. The ranch exploded into activity as news of the wedding spread. Rosa commanded the kitchen like a general preparing for battle, directing the preparation of what seemed like enough food to feed the entire territory. The ranch hands scrambled to clean themselves, and the main house stringing lanterns between buildings and gathering the last of the winter wildflowers from protected hollows. Clara found herself in Margaret's room, what would soon be her room with Maria and several other ranch women helping her into the wedding dress. It was simpler than Eastern fashion demanded, but more beautiful for it, cream-colored silk with delicate embroidery along the bodice flowing lines that suggested elegance without ostentation. It fits perfectly, Maria marveled, adjusting the hem. Like it was made for you. Margaret was about your size, Rosa said, pinning Clara's hair up with surprising gentleness. But more than that, you have the same spirit, the same fire that caught Senor Hayes's heart. Through the window, Clara could see guests arriving. Word had spread to neighboring ranches, and it seemed everyone wanted to witness the marriage of the woman who'd stood up to Eastern authority and the man who'd protected her. Judge Patterson had agreed to stay another day to officiate, and even Governor Morrison delayed his departure to attend. You nervous? Maria asked. Terrified, Clara admitted. Not about marrying Daniel that feels as right as breathing, but all these people, the attention. They come because you give them hope, Rosa said. A woman doctor, a love story born from rescue and courage, you and Senor Hayes remind them that beautiful things can grow in harsh places. A knock at the door interrupted them. Tom entered, dressed in what was probably his only clean shirt, holding a telegram. This just came for you, Doc. From Boston. Clara's hands trembled as she took it, certain it was more poison from Blackwood. But when she read it, tears sprang to her eyes. Dear Miss Monroe, stop. Senator Morrison's daughter, Elizabeth, sends congratulations on your wedding. Stop, you saved my life. Stop. Dr. Blackwood, under investigation for multiple misdiagnoses. Stop, your courage inspired others to speak. Stop, justice coming. Stop with gratitude, Elizabeth Morrison. What does it say? Maria asked anxiously. Clara read it aloud, her voice breaking on the last words. The women cheered and Tom grinned broadly. Looks like that Boston buzzard is getting his comeuppance after all, he said with satisfaction. Want me to tell the boss? No, Clara said, wiping her tears carefully to avoid ruining Rosa's careful work. I'll tell him tonight. Today is about our future, not the past. As the sun began its descent toward the mountains, painting the sky in shades of gold and rose, Clara made her way downstairs. The main room had been transformed with wildflowers everywhere and candles creating a warm glow. The entire ranch community was there, cowboys in their cleanest clothes, women in their best dresses, children scrubbed and fidgeting with excitement. But Clara only had eyes for Daniel standing at the makeshift altar in a black suit she'd never seen him wear, looking like every romantic dream she'd never dared to have. When he saw her, his expression shifted from nervous anticipation to something approaching awe. Tom, serving as Daniel's best man, whispered something that made Daniel smile, but his eyes never left Clara as she walked toward him, Pete offering his arm to escort her since she had no family present. You sure about this, Doc? Pete whispered. The boss can be a mite stubborn when he sets his mind to something. I'm counting on it, Clara whispered back. When they reached the altar, Pete placed Clara's hand in Daniel's with surprising gentleness. Take care of her, boss, or you'll answer to all of us. I'll guard her with my life, Daniel promised, and Clara knew he meant it literally. Judge Patterson cleared his throat, and the room fell silent. Dearly beloved, we gather here on this remarkable evening to witness something extraordinary, the union of two souls who found each other in the most unlikely circumstances. Daniel Hayes and Clara Monroe have chosen to bind their lives together not in the comfort of established society, but here on the frontier where love must be as strong as the people who dare to claim it. He looked at the assembled crowd. Is there anyone here who objects to this union? The question was met with such fierce silence that Clara almost laughed. She could see hands resting on gun butts as if daring anyone to speak against the marriage. I thought not, Patterson said with a smile. Daniel, your vows. Daniel took both of Clara's hands in his voice strong and clear. Clara Monroe, you came into my life like a blizzard, unexpected, overwhelming, and impossible to ignore. You brought warmth to a heart I thought was frozen forever. You brought healing to wounds I didn't know still bled. You brought purpose to a life that had become mere survival. His voice roughened with emotion. I promise to protect you not because you need protection, but because the thought of harm coming to you destroys me. I promise to support your dreams, especially the ones that scare others. I promise to stand beside you against any enemy, whether they come from Boston or beyond. I promise to love you with the same fierce dedication you show to your patients, your principles, and your people. I promise to be your husband, your partner, your safe harbor in every storm that comes. Clara was crying openly now, not caring who saw. When Patterson nodded to her, she had to take a breath before she could speak. Daniel Hayes, you saved my life in every way a person can be saved. You pulled me from the cold, but more than that, you pulled me from despair. You gave me purpose when I had none home, when I was lost. Love when I thought I was unworthy of it. She squeezed his hands. I promise to be your partner in all things, in running this ranch, in building our community, in facing whatever challenges come. I promise to heal not just your body when needed, but your heart when it hurts, and your spirit when it flags. I promise to love you with the wild freedom of this land you've given me without reservation or retreat. I promise to be your wife, your friend, your reason to smile even on the hardest days. I promise to choose you again and again in every moment of our lives together. The rings, Patterson asked. Tom produced 2 simple gold bands, and Clara gasped when she saw the inscription inside hers, frozen no more. How did you... she started. I had Tom ride to Denver the day after you agreed to marry me eventually, Daniel admitted. I wanted to be ready whenever you were. They exchanged rings, their hands steady, despite the emotion of the moment. Patterson raised his voice for the final pronouncement. by the power vested in me by Wyoming Territory, and more importantly, by the love evident between these two people, I now pronounce you husband and wife. Daniel, you may kiss your bride." The kiss was everything gentle and passionate promise and fulfillment, ending and beginning all at once. The room erupted in cheers, cowboys throwing their hats in the air, women dabbing at tears, children dancing with excitement. As they turned to face their community as husband and wife, Clara saw something that stopped her heart. There in the doorway stood a small group of women in traveling clothes, their faces uncertain but hopeful. "What's wrong?" Daniel asked, following her gaze. The lead woman stepped forward hesitantly. "We're sorry to interrupt your wedding, but we heard there was a lady doctor here who would train women in medicine. We've come from Denver, from Salt Lake City, from as far as San Francisco. Is it true?" Clara looked at Daniel, who smiled and nodded. She stepped forward, still in her wedding dress, and addressed the women. "It's true. I'm Dr. Clara Hayes." The name felt new and right on her tongue. "And yes, I'll be training women in medicine and nursing. You're welcome here, all of you." The women's faces lit up with hope, and Clara realized this was just the beginning. Her marriage to Daniel wasn't just a personal triumph, but a professional one. As his wife, she had even more standing in the community, more authority to make real change. The wedding feast that followed was legendary even by Double H standards. Rosa had outdone herself with food that seemed to multiply miraculously as more people arrived from town, drawn by the celebration. The dining hall overflowed into the yard where bonfires had been lit against the cold. Clara found herself dancing with what seemed like every man on the ranch, each offering congratulations and promises of support. But it was her dance with Carlos that touched her most. "You see, Senora Hayes?" he said, still moving carefully due to his healing wound. "I told you we protect our own. Now you are twice ours as our doctor and as our boss's wife." "Thank you, Carlos, for everything." "No, Senora, thank you. You and Senor Hayes, you show us that people can change their fate, that where we come from doesn't decide where we go." Governor Morrison claimed the next dance, speaking quietly as they moved. "Mrs. Hayes, I want you to know that Blackwood's reputation is crumbling. Your stand against him inspired others. 3 nurses and 2 junior doctors have come forward with similar stories of his misdiagnoses and bullying. The Massachusetts Medical Board is launching a full investigation." "I never wanted to destroy him," Clara said honestly. "I just wanted to save lives." "And that's precisely why you've won," Morrison said. "Integrity always defeats arrogance, though sometimes it takes time." As the evening progressed, Clara found moments to speak with the women who'd arrived seeking training. They were a diverse group: a widow from Denver, whose doctor husband had taught her his trade in secret, a former midwife from Salt Lake City, who wanted to learn surgical techniques, a young woman from San Francisco, whose wealthy father was willing to fund her medical education if she could find someone to provide it. "We can start next week," Clara told them. "The territorial government is funding a hospital here. Until it's built, we'll work from the ranch, learning by doing. I won't lie to you, it'll be hard. Some people will resist the idea of women in medicine, but here, with the support of this community, we can prove them wrong." "We're ready for hard," the widow Mrs. Patterson said firmly. "We wouldn't have come all this way if we weren't." As midnight approached, Daniel finally managed to extract Clara from the celebration, leading her outside where the stars blazed overhead. They walked slowly toward the small house that would be their private quarters, a wedding gift from the ranch hands who'd worked in secret to prepare it. "Happy?" Daniel asked, his arm around her waist. "Beyond words," Clara admitted. "Though I'm a little terrified. All those women coming to learn the hospital, to build the ranch, to help run." "You'll manage it all brilliantly," Daniel said with complete confidence. "You've already transformed this place in weeks. Imagine what you'll do with years." They reached the house, and Daniel swept Clara up in his arms to carry her over the threshold. The interior was simple but warm, with furniture that looked handmade and quilts that Clara recognized as the work of the ranch women. "Our home," Daniel said softly, setting her down but keeping her in his arms. "Our beginning," Clara corrected. That night, as Clara lay in her husband's arms, she thought about the journey that had brought her here.
from that frozen train platform where death had seemed the only option to this warm bed in a house full of love and possibility. Blackwood had tried to destroy her, but instead he'd driven her to a place where she could become more than she'd ever dreamed. The next morning brought new challenges and revelations. A rider arrived at dawn with news that would change everything. The territorial legislature had passed the Women's Suffrage Act, making Wyoming the first territory to grant women the right to vote. But more personally relevant, they'd also passed legislation officially recognizing Clara's medical credentials and appointing her as territorial medical supervisor for the Southeastern District. "What does that mean?" Clara asked, reading the official document over breakfast. "It means," Daniel said with a grin, "that you're now officially in charge of medical practices for a quarter of Wyoming. Every doctor, every midwife, every person practicing medicine in this region now answers to you." Clara set down the document with shaking hands. That's an enormous responsibility. One you're ready for," Daniel assured her. "And you won't be alone. You have me, the ranch, and now these women you're training. You're building something revolutionary here, Clara." The weeks that followed were a whirlwind of activity. The women who'd come to train proved themselves dedicated and capable, quickly adapting to the harsh realities of frontier medicine. Clara established a rigorous curriculum that combined theoretical knowledge with practical experience, using the ranch's steady stream of injuries and illnesses as teaching opportunities. Mrs. Patterson, the widow from Denver, showed particular promise in surgery. Sarah, the young woman from San Francisco, had a gift for diagnosis that reminded Clara of herself. The midwife Ruth brought years of practical experience that enriched everyone's learning. The hospital construction began in earnest, with Daniel overseeing the project personally. He insisted on the best materials, the most modern equipment that could be obtained. "We're not building for today," he told the architects. "We're building for the next century." One afternoon, as Clara was teaching wound suturing techniques using pigskin, Tom burst into the makeshift classroom. "Doc Hayes riders coming in hard. Looks like trouble." Clara grabbed her medical bag automatically, but when she reached the yard, she saw the riders weren't injured. They were lawmen, federal marshals by their badges, and they looked grim. "Mrs. Hayes, Bob?" the lead marshal asked. "Dr. Clara Hayes, yes." "Ma'am, we're here on official business from Boston. Dr. Harrison Blackwood is dead." Clara felt the world tilt. "Dead? How?" "Suicide, ma'am. Left a note confessing to falsifying medical records, causing at least 12 deaths through misdiagnosis and destroying the careers of anyone who challenged him. Your name was specifically mentioned as someone he'd wronged. His estate is being liquidated to pay damages to victims' families, and the Massachusetts Medical Board wants to formally apologize and reinstate your credentials." Clara sank onto a bench, Daniel's strong presence suddenly beside her. "He killed himself. Yesterday morning, ma'am. The investigation was closing in. He was facing criminal charges, loss of his license, complete disgrace. Guess he couldn't face it." Clara thought about the man who'd pursued her with such venom, who'd tried so hard to destroy her. She should feel vindicated, perhaps even glad. Instead, she felt only sadness at the waste of it all. "Thank you for telling me," she said quietly. The marshals tipped their hats and left, but the news had already spread through the ranch. The women gathered around Clara, their faces showing mixed emotions. "He was a monster," Sarah said firmly. "He destroyed lives." "He was a broken man," Clara corrected gently. His pride and fear of being wrong made him monstrous, but underneath he was just human, flawed, frightened, ultimately tragic. "You're more forgiving than I would be," Mrs. Patterson said. "Forgiveness isn't for him," Clara said. "It's for me. Carrying hatred is like swallowing poison and expecting the other person to die. Blackwood is gone. The future is what matters now." That evening, as Clara made her rounds checking on patients, she found Daniel in the cemetery standing by Margaret's grave. She joined him silently, taking his hand. "I was telling her about you, he said softly. "About the hospital, the women you're training, the changes you're bringing. She would be so proud that her ranch is becoming a beacon of progress." "Our ranch?" Clara corrected. "Our beacon." "Yes," Daniel agreed, pulling her close. "Ours." As they stood there in the fading light, Clara felt a sense of completion. The woman who'd sat freezing on that train platform was gone, replaced by someone stronger, more purposeful, more loved than she'd ever imagined possible. Dr. Clara Hayes. Frontier physician, teacher, wife, and revolutionary. The sound of laughter drifted from the main house where her students were sharing dinner with the ranch hands. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, patients to treat students, to teach a hospital, to build a community, to serve. But tonight, standing with her husband in the peaceful cemetery, Clara felt only gratitude for the strange, difficult, beautiful journey that had brought her home. "What are you thinking?" Daniel asked. "About fate," Clara said. "If that train hadn't left without me, if you hadn't been at the station, if any one thing had been different, then something else would have brought us together," Daniel said firmly. "Some things are meant to be, Clara. We were meant to be." A year later, the Cheyenne Territorial Hospital opened its doors with Dr. Clara Hayes as its director. The opening ceremony drew dignitaries from across the territory and beyond. Newspaper reporters from as far as New York came to document this revolutionary institution, where women learned medicine alongside men, where frontier pragmatism met Eastern knowledge, where no one was turned away for lack of funds. Clara stood at the podium, looking out at the crowd. She saw her students, now certified medical practitioners themselves. She saw the ranch families whose lives she'd touched. She saw Governor Morrison and Judge Patterson, who'd believed in her when it mattered. And in the front row, she saw Daniel, his eyes shining with pride. "This hospital," Clara began, her voice carrying clearly, "stands as proof that the frozen places in our lives need not remain frozen, that from the harshest winters can come the most beautiful springs, that sometimes being broken is just the beginning of becoming whole." She paused, finding Daniel's eyes again. "Someone once wrapped their coat around me when I was freezing to death, literally and figuratively. That act of kindness, of love, changed not just my life, but the lives of everyone this hospital will serve. So I dedicate this institution not just to medicine, but to the power of human compassion to transform the impossible into the inevitable." The applause was thunderous, but Clara barely heard it. She was too busy watching her husband's face, seeing in it the same love that had saved her that winter night. Daniel had been right. Some things were meant to be. And as she looked at the hospital bearing her name, at the students she'd trained, at the community she'd helped heal, Clara knew that every frozen moment had been worth it to reach this warm, bright, glorious spring. The ceremony continued with tours of the facility, demonstrations of new surgical techniques, and testimonials from patients whose lives had been saved. But the moment that would be remembered, that would make it into history books and inspire generations of female physicians, came at the end. A young girl, perhaps 10 years old, tugged at Clara's skirt. "Dr. Hayes," she said in a small voice, "I want to be like you when I grow up. Can girls really be doctors?" Clara knelt down to the girl's level, aware that the crowd had gone silent to hear her answer. "Not only can girls be doctors," she said clearly, "but they can be anything they have the courage and determination to become. The world will tell you no sometimes. People will try to freeze you out. But if you keep your own fire burning bright enough, you can melt any ice in your path." The girl smiled brilliantly and threw her arms around Clara's neck. The photograph of that embraced the frontier's first female doctor, and the child who would 20 years later become Wyoming's first female surgeon would become iconic, a symbol of progress and possibility. As the sun set over the hospital, painting the sky in familiar shades of gold and rose, Clara and Daniel stood together on the building's porch, watching their community celebrate below. "No regrets?" Daniel asked. "How could I regret the path that brought me to you?" Clara replied. "That frozen night at the train station was the beginning of everything." "Then here's to frozen nights," Daniel said, raising his glass, "and to the warm hearts that thaw them." They drank to that, to their love, to their future, to the hospital that would serve generations, to the women who would follow in Clara's footsteps, to the ranch that had become a symbol of sanctuary and second chances. Later, much later, when historians would write about the settlement of the American West, they would include the story of Clara and Daniel Hayes, how a millionaire rancher found a freezing nurse at a train station, how their love story became legend, how together they changed the face of frontier medicine and women's rights, how they proved that sometimes the most beautiful endings come from the most desperate beginnings. But that night, they were simply Clara and Daniel. Two people who'd found each other against all odds standing together as the stars came out over Wyoming. Their love story not making history, but simply living it, one shared heartbeat at a time.